I spent 25 years believing I was unwanted. The truth was worse. I was loved so much that 3 people sacrificed everything to keep me safe from a secret that would destroy me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, on the day I finally left the only home I'd ever known. The morning air in Denver carried that particular sharpness that comes in early September, when summer hasn't quite surrendered, but autumn has already sent its scouts ahead. I stood on the front steps of Riverside Foster Home, holding a cardboard box that contained everything I owned. 25 years of life compressed into 12 pounds of belongings. 3 changes of clothes, a battered copy of Little Women that I'd read so many times the spine had given up trying to hold itself together. A coffee mug with a crack running through the handle that I kept meaning to throw away but never did. And a photograph of me at age 8, gap-toothed and grinning, arms around 2 other foster kids whose names I could no longer remember. That's what institutional childhood does. It teaches you that people are temporary. That attachment is just another word for eventual disappointment. That the smart thing, the safe thing, is to keep everyone at arm's length and never, ever expect permanence. My name is Emma Kate Hartley, though I didn't know the Hartley part until much later. For most of my life, I was just Emma Kate, last name unknown, origin story uncertain, future questionable. The kind of kid who shows up in case files and social worker reports but never quite makes it into anyone's family album. Mrs. Patterson found me in the common room that morning. She was 67 years old with steel gray hair, pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows permanently into an expression of mild surprise. She'd been director of Riverside for 32 years, which meant she'd seen hundreds of kids come and go. I was one of the ones who came and never quite managed to leave. She stood in the doorway watching me pretend to be busy organizing my box. The truth was there wasn't much to organize, but I kept rearranging items anyway because stopping meant acknowledging that this was really happening. "Emma," she said, her voice carrying that careful gentleness that adults use when they're about to tell you something they think you don't want to hear. "You can't hide here forever. You deserve a life." I looked up at her. The morning light coming through the window behind her turned her into a silhouette, features obscured, just a shape of authority and complicated affection. 7 years I'd worked here as a volunteer counselor after aging out of the system at 18. 7 years of telling myself I was staying to help the younger kids, to give back, to make a difference. The truth, which Mrs. Patterson knew and I was only beginning to admit, was that I was terrified of leaving. This building with its scuffed linoleum and institutional paint colors was the closest thing to permanent I'd ever had. "I have a life," I said, but even I could hear how hollow it sounded. She walked into the room and sat down on the couch beside me. Up close, I could see the web of fine lines around her eyes, the softness that years of witnessing childhood trauma and resilience had etched into her face. "You have a job," she corrected. "You have a routine. You have a place you show up every day. That's not the same as a life." I wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. She was right, of course. I counseled 8-year-olds about not being afraid to attach to foster families, while I myself had remained frozen at 18, unable to move forward, terrified of what lay beyond these walls. Mrs. Patterson reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. It was old, yellowed at the edges, sealed with tape that had gone brittle with age. My name was written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. Careful letters, slightly slanted, the kind of penmanship they don't teach anymore. "What is this?" I asked. "Your grandmother left it with us before she passed away," Mrs. Patterson said, "in 1999. We were instructed to give it to you only when you permanently left our care. I'm sorry we couldn't tell you sooner, Emma." Those were her wishes. The words seemed to hang in the air between us. Grandmother. It felt foreign in my mouth, like trying to speak a language I'd never learned. For 25 years, I'd believed the story that had been told to me. Abandoned as an infant on the steps of St. Catherine's Church downtown. No note, no name, no explanation. Just a baby in a basket like something out of a fairy tale, except fairy tales usually ended with the baby being claimed by someone who wanted her. "I have a grandmother?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Had," Mrs. Patterson corrected gently. "She passed away in 1999, just a few months after she left this with us." I turned the envelope over in my hands. It was heavier than I expected. Something substantial inside, not just paper. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why did I have to wait?" Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with something that looked like regret. Those were her instructions, honey. And legally, until you were no longer in our care, we had to honor them. I've kept this in my office safe for 25 years, waiting for this day. 25 years, my entire life, there had been someone who knew about me, someone who had made arrangements, who had planned for this moment, someone who had cared enough to leave instructions. My hands were shaking as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter on paper so old it felt like fabric between my fingers. Beneath it, a small brass key on a faded ribbon. And at the bottom, a legal document that I would later learn was a property deed. I unfolded the letter slowly. The same careful handwriting from the envelope covered 3 pages. Dated September 1998, just weeks before I was born. My dearest Emma Kate, it began. I had to stop reading for a moment because no one had ever called me their dearest anything. In 25 years of institutional living and professional caregiving, I'd been sweetie and honey and dear, but never someone's dearest. Never claimed with that kind of specific possessive love. I took a breath and kept reading. If you're reading this, I am gone and you have left Riverside's care. I know you must have so many questions, and I wish I could have been there to answer them in person, but circumstances beyond my control made that impossible. I am your grandmother, Grace Hartley. I gave birth to your mother, Catherine, in 1975, and I raised her alone on a ranch in Stillwater, Wyoming. When Catherine was 23, she gave birth to you, and for 9 perfect months, I had you both. Then I made the hardest choice of my life. I took you to Denver and placed you in foster care. Not because I didn't love you, because I loved you too much to let you carry the weight of our family's secret. I've left you the Hartley Ranch, 160 acres, a small house, and an old red Ford truck that belonged to your grandfather Thomas. He died before you were born, before your mother was born. His death created a silence that poisoned everything that came after. In the truck, you'll find his journal and mine. Read them both. Then decide what to do with the truth we've been hiding for 50 years. I couldn't be the grandmother who taught you to bake or braid your hair, but I was the grandmother who watched from a distance, who sent anonymous donations to Riverside, who prayed every night that you'd grow up whole and happy despite what I'd done. Forgive me if you can, understand me if you can't. With all the love I never got to show you, Grace Hartley. I read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. Each time I tried to find anger in myself, tried to summon the outrage of someone who'd been abandoned and lied to. But all I could feel was a desperate, aching curiosity. What secret could be worth 25 years of loneliness? What had my grandmother been protecting me from? Mrs. Patterson sat quietly beside me while I read. When I finally looked up, she handed me a tissue I hadn't realized I needed. She came here once, Mrs. Patterson said. When you were about 3 months old, she didn't come inside, just stood across the street watching the building. I happened to be leaving for the day and saw her there. She was crying. Why didn't she come in? I asked. I asked her that. She said she'd made a promise, that coming inside would break it, that seeing you up close would destroy her resolve to keep you safe. Mrs. Patterson paused. I've thought about that conversation 1,000 times over the years. I never understood what she meant about keeping you safe. Maybe now you'll find out. I looked down at the property deed. 160 acres in Stillwater, Wyoming. A place I'd never heard of, a grandmother I'd never met, a mother who apparently existed somewhere, though the letter didn't say where, and a secret that had shaped my entire life without my knowing it. What should I do? I asked. Mrs. Patterson smiled. I think you know the answer to that. I had $847 in my savings account. Money earned from my counselor position at Riverside, paid in small increments over 7 years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a car and make the drive to Wyoming. I had no job lined up, no apartment waiting, no plan beyond discovering what my grandmother had left behind. For someone who had spent her entire life following rules and schedules imposed by others, the freedom was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I left Denver at dawn the next morning. The rental car was a compact sedan that smelled like artificial pine and previous renters' regrets. I programmed the address from the deed into my phone's GPS and watched as it calculated the route. 9 hours and 43 minutes. Through the endless flatness of eastern Colorado, up into Wyoming, where the landscape started to remember it had bones beneath its skin. The radio kept me company for the first few hours. Morning news giving way to talk shows, giving way to country music stations that seemed to multiply the further I got from the city. Songs about home and heartbreak, about leaving and coming back, about roots that pulled at you no matter how far you traveled. I turned it off somewhere past Cheyenne. The silence felt more honest. As I drove, I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake at Riverside imagining who my family might be. I'd created elaborate fantasies. Maybe my mother was young and scared and had planned to come back for me. Maybe there'd been some terrible accident that prevented her return. Maybe somewhere out there someone was looking for me, wondering what had happened to the baby they'd lost. The reality, as it turned out, was both simpler and more complicated. I hadn't been lost. I'd been hidden. The landscape changed as I drove north. The plains gave way to rolling hills. The sky seemed to expand, pushing up and out until it felt like you could see the curve of the earth. I passed through small towns with names like Medicine Bow and Elk Mountain, places that looked like they'd been put on pause sometime in the 1970s and never bothered to resume. My phone's GPS led me off the interstate eventually, onto smaller highways, then onto two-lane roads that seemed to exist more from habit than intention. The distant peaks grew larger in my windshield, their presence both comforting and overwhelming. And then, just as the afternoon light was starting to think about becoming evening, I saw the sign for Stillwater. Population 890, established 1889, home of the 1973 state baseball champions. The town itself appeared like something from a postcard that had been left too long in the sun. Main Street ran for maybe 6 blocks, lined with buildings that had seen better decades. Morrison's General Store occupied the corner lot, its green awning faded to the color of old moss. Next to it, Stillwater Diner advertised breakfast served all day in letters that had lost several of their bulbs. A gas station that looked like it had stopped updating its aesthetic around 1982. A small white church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left, as if it had grown tired and was considering a nap. I pulled into the diner's parking lot. My hands were shaking, though whether from nerves or the 9 hours of driving, I couldn't say. Through the window, I could see a handful of customers scattered among the red vinyl booths. An older man at the counter reading a newspaper. 2 women in a booth by the window, coffee cups between them, heads bent in conversation. I needed directions to the ranch, and I needed to steady myself before I got there. The diner seemed like it could provide both. A bell above the door announced my entrance. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted. Eyes tracked my movement the way eyes do in small towns when someone unfamiliar walks into a familiar space. Not hostile, but curious. Assessing. I slid into a booth near the back. A waitress appeared almost immediately. She was in her mid-70s, silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of smiling at strangers. Her name tag said Sarah. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please." She poured, steady-handed and practiced, then looked at me with eyes that seemed to see more than I wanted them to. "Passing through?" she asked. "Actually, I'm looking for a ranch, the Hartley place." I watched her face as I said it, saw something flicker across her expression. Recognition. Surprise. Something else I couldn't quite name. "You're Grace Hartley's granddaughter," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know? You look just like her. Same eyes, same way of holding yourself, like you're not quite sure you're allowed to take up space." She set the coffee pot down and slid into the booth across from me without asking. "I'm Sarah Morrison. Grace and I were friends for 40 years. The simple past tense of that sentence landed heavy. We're friends, past, done. "I never met her," I said. "I know." Sarah's expression carried a weight of things unsaid. That was Grace's choice. Not an easy one, but hers nonetheless. "Do you know why?" The question came out more desperate than I'd intended. "Why she gave me up. The letter mentions a secret, but it doesn't say what." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she'd poured for herself. Through the window behind her, I could see the peaks in the distance, solid and unchanging. "That's not my story to tell," she said finally. "Grace left you the ranch and the truth. She wanted you to find it yourself, not hear it secondhand from folks in town." She paused. "But I will tell you this. Your grandmother was one of the strongest, kindest, loneliest women I ever knew. And everything she did, every choice she made, was to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From the past. From a tragedy that shaped 3 generations. From a burden she didn't think a child should have to carry." Sarah reached across the table and patted my hand. It was the kind of gesture that should have felt patronizing, but somehow didn't. You be careful out there, honey. Some things are buried for good reason. She gave me directions to the ranch. 8 miles north of town, turn left at the fork in the road, look for the weathered, white mailbox with Hartley barely visible on the side. She also gave me her phone number, written on a napkin in the same careful handwriting that seemed to be a generation marker. You call if you need anything, she said. Grace would have wanted someone looking out for you. I thanked her and paid for coffee I'd barely touched. As I stood to leave, Sarah caught my arm. One more thing, she said. There are people in this town who'd prefer the past stayed buried. You start digging, you might not like what you find, and others might not like that you're looking. It should have sounded like a threat, but her tone was more worried grandmother than menacing stranger. I nodded and left, the bell above the door marking my exit the same way it had marked my entrance. The drive to the ranch felt longer than 8 miles. The road wound through grassland that rolled away in all directions, broken occasionally by fence lines and clusters of cattle. The peaks grew larger in the windshield, their presence both reassuring and daunting. The mailbox appeared on the left, just as Sarah had described. White paint peeling away to show gray wood beneath. The word Hartley visible only if you knew to look for it. I turned onto a gravel drive that had seen better decades, grass growing up through the middle where tires didn't quite reach anymore. Through a stand of cottonwood trees, the house came into view. It was small, smaller than I'd imagined when the deed said 160 acres. A simple ranch style, white paint faded to the color of old bones, black shutters hanging slightly crooked. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired horse. The porch wrapped around the front, boards grayed with age and weather. Behind the house, a barn stood listing slightly to the left, its red paint almost completely surrendered to the elements. Next to it, a horse corral with rails that probably needed replacing. And there, parked beside the barn, like it was waiting for someone to come back, a faded red pickup truck. I sat in the rental car for a long moment, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. This was my grandmother's home, the place where she'd lived for almost 30 years after my grandfather died, the place where she'd raised my mother, the place where, for 9 months, I'd existed before being taken away. The afternoon sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting everything in that particular golden light that makes the past feel closer than it should. I got out of the car. The air smelled different here, sage and grass and something else, something I didn't have a name for. The smell of wide open spaces and long silences. The brass key from the envelope fit smoothly into the front door lock, as if it had been waiting 25 years for exactly this moment. The door opened with a creak that echoed through the empty interior, releasing the musty smell of a place that had been closed up for too long. Inside, everything was frozen in time. The furniture was simple but well made, covered in white sheets that had yellowed with age. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the windows, and I could see my footprints marking the floor as I walked through the rooms. The house was small, living room opening to a kitchen with a dining table still set with placemats. Down a short hallway, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. That was it. The entirety of my grandmother's domestic life compressed into maybe 1,200 square feet. In the kitchen, I found dishes still in the drying rack beside the sink, as if Grace had washed them one final time before leaving and never came back. The refrigerator was empty and unplugged, but the pantry still held canned goods with expiration dates from 1999. On the kitchen table, a calendar was still turned to December 1999, with several dates circled in red ink that had faded to pink. I opened the refrigerator again, looking more carefully this time. On one of the shelves, held in place with a magnet shaped like Wyoming, was a photograph. It showed a young couple, maybe early 20s. The woman was beautiful in that effortless way some people are. Dark hair, bright eyes, smile that seemed to light her face from within. The man beside her had his arm around her shoulders, cowboy hat pushed back on his head, grin wide and genuine. I turned the photo over. Written on the back in that same careful handwriting, Thomas and Grace, June 1971, Stillwater, newlyweds. My grandparents, young and happy and completely unaware of how their story would end. I carried the photo with me as I explored the rest of the house. The living room held a couch that sagged in the middle from years of use, a rocking chair positioned to look out the front window, bookshelves lined with volumes that spanned everything from ranch management to poetry. On one wall, more photographs. Grace and a baby I assumed was my mother. Grace and a toddler. Grace and a young girl. Grace and a teenager. A chronological record of my mother growing up. And then the photographs stopped. The last one showed my mother at maybe 16 or 17. After that, nothing. No graduation photos, no wedding pictures, no photos of Grace and my mother as adults. Just a gap where those images should have been. The first bedroom was clearly Grace's. An iron bed frame with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and white. A dresser with a mirror that had spots where the silver backing had worn through. On the nightstand, reading glasses, a Bible with ribbon markers throughout, and a bottle of sleeping pills that was still half full. I opened the dresser drawers carefully, feeling like an intruder, even though this was technically mine now. Grace's clothes were still folded inside. Simple things, jeans and flannel shirts, a few dresses that looked like they'd been worn to church. Everything practical, nothing frivolous. The wardrobe of a woman who'd learned to live without excess. In the bottom drawer, I found something that made me sit down hard on the edge of the bed. A stack of letters, maybe 30 or 40 of them, tied together with a faded ribbon. The envelopes were addressed in childish handwriting, to Santa Claus, North Pole. I untied the ribbon with shaking hands and opened the first envelope. Inside, on paper decorated with candy canes, a letter from a 5-year-old in uncertain print. Dear Santa, I want a grandma for Christmas. All the other kids have grandmas and I don't have one. Can you bring me a grandma who makes cookies? Thank you, Emma. The date on the letter was December 1998. I'd been at Riverside for 3 years by then. I opened another, this one from when I was 8, the handwriting more confident, but the content still heartbreaking. Dear Santa, I know you probably can't bring a grandma because people aren't toys. But can you tell my mom I'm sorry for whatever I did wrong? I've been really good this year. I help with the little kids and I clean my room and I don't complain. If she knows I'm being good, maybe she'll come back. Love, Emma. There were more. Years of letters I'd written to Santa, letters that the staff at Riverside must have collected and sent somewhere, somehow making their way to Grace. Letters asking for families and mothers and someone to love me. Letters apologizing for whatever I'd done to deserve being unwanted. Letters that grew shorter and more cynical as I got older, until the last one, dated December 2010, when I was 12. Dear Santa, I don't believe in you anymore. But if you're real, and if you can do magic, tell my mom I understand why she left. I'm not mad. I just want her to know I turned out okay. And if my grandma is still alive somewhere, tell her I wish I could have met her, that's all, Emma. Grace had kept every single letter, tied them with a ribbon like they were precious, like they mattered. I sat on her bed holding those letters and cried for the first time since leaving Denver. Not quiet tears, but full-body sobs that shook my shoulders and made breathing difficult. All those years of thinking no one cared, no one remembered, no one even knew I existed. And here was proof that someone had been paying attention. Someone had been collecting evidence of my childhood, storing it away like treasure. When I could breathe normally again, I wiped my eyes and stood. There was one more room to see. The second bedroom was smaller. The door had been closed, and when I opened it, the hinges protested with a squeal that echoed through the empty house. Inside, the room was painted a soft yellow that had faded over the years but still held its warmth. White curtains with small daisies hung at the window, sun-bleached but intact. Against one wall stood a crib, white paint chipped in places. Next to it, a changing table. And in the corner by the window, a rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light. This was my mother's room, the room where Grace had raised her daughter alone. But it was more than that. On the shelf above the changing table, stuffed animals sat in a neat row, tags still attached. In the closet, tiny clothes hung on tiny hangers, never worn. On the wall, a mobile of stars and moons hung motionless, waiting for a baby who had never slept beneath it. This room had been prepared for me, I realized. Grace had set up a nursery, had planned to raise me here, in this house, on this ranch. Something had changed those plans. Something had forced her to take me to Denver instead, to place me in foster care, to watch from a distance for 25 years. The secret she'd mentioned in her letter, the truth hidden in the journals, it was here somewhere, waiting to be discovered. I left the house and walked around to the barn. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property. Somewhere a meadowlark was singing, oblivious to the weight of human history playing out beneath its perch. The barn doors stood slightly open, as if someone had left in a hurry and never bothered to come back and close them properly. Inside, it was dim and cool, smelling of old hay and motor oil and decades of accumulated dust. Farm equipment I couldn't identify lined the walls. Tools hung on pegboards, each one outlined in marker to show where it belonged. Hay bales stacked in the loft, dried and crumbling. And in the back corner, covered with a dusty tarp, the distinctive shape of a vehicle. I pulled the tarp away, raising clouds of dust that made me cough. Beneath it sat a 1974 Ford F-100 pickup truck. The red paint had faded to the color of old brick, but it was still clearly red. Still clearly the truck my grandmother had mentioned in her letter. The door protested when I opened it, but swung wide on hinges that had been well maintained at some point. The interior smelled like old leather and tobacco and something else, something masculine that I couldn't quite place. Tom's jacket still hung from the gun rack behind the seat. Worn canvas with fleece lining, one pocket torn. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cracked but solid. My hands found the steering wheel naturally, and for a moment I could almost imagine what it had been like. My grandfather sitting here driving these roads, working this land, completely unaware of how his story would end. I searched the cab methodically. Under the seat I found a locked metal toolbox. The lock was rusted but still intact. Using a screwdriver from the pegboard on the barn wall, I pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept them safe from moisture and time, 3 items waited. A photograph, edges worn soft from handling. A stack of letters bound with string. A small leather journal. The photograph showed the same couple from the kitchen picture, but younger. Grace couldn't have been more than 19, standing next to a man in his early 20s. They were both smiling with the particular intensity of people deeply, desperately in love. On the back, written in faded ink, Grace and Thomas, June 1971, Fort Benning, Georgia. The letters were all from Thomas, written from various places. I read them in chronological order, watching their relationship unfold through his words. He wrote about his dreams for their future, about the ranch they would buy together, about the children they would have. The letters were full of hope and plans and a tenderness that made my chest ache. The last letter was dated May 1974, much shorter than the others. My darling Grace, I don't have much time to write this. Things have gotten complicated in ways I can't explain in a letter. I've made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it. If something happens to me, please know that I love you more than life itself. Every moment with you was worth whatever comes next. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. All my love, Tom. I stared at that letter for a long time, trying to understand what mistake he was referring to. What had happened that made him write something that sounded so much like a goodbye? The journal provided some answers, but not all of them. It started in January 1974, with entries about ranch life, about being newlyweds, about Grace being pregnant, and Tom's excitement about becoming a father. But as the months progressed, the tone changed. The entries grew darker, more anxious. February 15th, 1974. Money troubles. The ranch isn't bringing in what we need. James offered to help, but I can't take his charity. Not after everything. March 3rd, 1974. Fighting with Grace again. She says I'm drinking too much. She's right, but I don't know. I don't know how to stop. The pressure is crushing me. April 10th, 1974. I made a mistake today. A terrible, terrible mistake. James will never forgive me. I can't forgive myself. God, what have I done? And then the entries stopped. Just blank pages after that until the final entry, dated May 12th, 1974. I don't deserve to live. Grace will be better off without me. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. Tell her this was my choice and my fault. Only mine. Don't blame Grace for what she did to protect me. The journal ended there. No explanation of what the mistake was. No details about what had happened. Just a man's final words before what I could only assume was his death. I sat in the truck, holding these pieces of my grandfather's life and tried to make sense of them. He died in May 1974. My mother had been born sometime that year, which meant Grace was pregnant when Tom died. Something terrible had happened. Something that made him feel he didn't deserve to live. Something that Grace had protected him from. or covered up, or hidden. I needed more information. The truck clearly held secrets, but what else might be hidden here? I examined the truck more carefully. The bench seat, the glove box, the space behind the seat back. That's when I noticed something odd. The seat back didn't quite sit flush against the cab wall. There was a gap, maybe half an inch, that shouldn't have been there. I ran my fingers along the edge and felt something give. A hidden panel. With some effort, I pried it open, revealing a hollow space behind the seat. Inside was a waterproof bag, the kind used for camping. And inside that, another journal. This one with Grace's name embossed on the cover in gold letters that had faded but remained legible. I opened it carefully. The first entry was dated May 13th, 1974. Thomas is dead. He shot himself in the barn at 3:47 this morning. I heard the gunshot. I found him. There was so much blood. The sheriff will be here soon. Henry Morrison is with me. I have to decide right now what to tell them. The truth is this. Tom accidentally killed James's boy. Little Jamie, only 6 years old. It was an accident. Tom was drunk, backing the truck, didn't see Jamie playing behind it, crushed him against the barn wall, killed him instantly. James forgave Tom. That's the terrible thing. James actually forgave him, said it was an accident, said he didn't blame Tom. But he set one condition. Tom had to leave Stillwater forever, could never come back. James couldn't bear to see him every day, couldn't heal with Tom here. Tom couldn't live with that. He couldn't leave me. He couldn't stay. So he chose the third option. Now I have to decide. Do I tell the truth? That James Hartley's son is dead because of my husband's drinking? That Tom killed himself out of guilt? Do I destroy James's family by making this public? Or do I protect them all? I'm going to lie. I'm going to tell Sheriff Porter that Tom died in a ranch accident. Equipment malfunction. Henry will back me up. He owes Tom that much. They were best friends. James knows the truth. He'll have to live with it silently. I'll have to live with it silently. That's the price we pay. I sat in the truck as the light outside faded to dusk and read Grace's journal entry over and over. My grandfather had killed a child while drunk, had committed suicide rather than face the consequences. My grandmother had lied to authorities to cover it up. The next entry was dated May 15th, 1974. James came to see me today. He said he won't press charges about the lies I told the sheriff, but he made me promise something. If I ever have children, they can never know the truth. The Hartley name is ruined enough. If this gets out, his remaining children will suffer forever. I promised. God forgive me. I promised to keep this secret for the rest of my life. I'm 3 months pregnant with Tom's baby. Our daughter will grow up never knowing what her father did, never knowing how he died, never knowing the truth about any of it. That's the price of the silence James and I bought. We'll both pay it until we die. The sun had set completely while I read. The barn was dark now, just the shape of shadows and the lingering smell of old machinery and older secrets. I sat in my grandfather's truck, holding my grandmother's confession, and understood finally why I'd been given up. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a tragedy that had poisoned 3 generations. And now I had to decide what to do with it. The evidence in my hands could destroy powerful people, but it might also destroy me. And maybe that destruction was exactly what my grandmother had been trying to prevent for the past 50 years. I didn't sleep that first night at the ranch. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words from Grace's journal. Tom accidentally killed James's boy. Little Jamie, only 6 years old. The image of it played in my mind like a horror film I couldn't turn off. A drunk man backing up a truck. A child playing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. The terrible finality of metal meeting flesh. I sat at Grace's kitchen table as the hours crawled toward dawn, reading both journals over and over, trying to understand not just what had happened, but why everyone had chosen to bury it. Tom's guilt made sense. A man kills a child, even accidentally, and the weight of that could crush any conscience. His suicide, while tragic, followed a certain logic of despair. But Grace's choice to lie to the authorities, that was more complicated. And James Hartley's demand for silence in exchange for not pressing charges, that revealed layers of pain and pragmatism I was only beginning to comprehend. The sun rose over the peaks eventually, the way it always does, indifferent to human tragedy. I made coffee in Grace's ancient percolator, watching through the kitchen window as the light changed the landscape from shadow to substance. Somewhere out there was James Hartley, the man who'd lost his son and then demanded my mother leave town 23 years later. Somewhere out there was the truth about why my family had fractured across 3 generations. And somewhere, according to Grace's letter, was my mother, still alive, still carrying her own burden of this secret. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. Morrison's General Store opened at 7. I was there at 7:03, the bell above the door announcing my arrival into a space that smelled like coffee and old wood and decades of small-town commerce. The man behind the counter looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading. He was in his late 70s, I guessed, weathered the way men get when they've spent their lives working outdoors. White hair that might have been blonde once, blue eyes sharp despite his age, hands that looked like they'd built things and fixed things and knew the value of both. He saw me and went absolutely still. Not the stillness of someone surprised, but the stillness of someone who'd been waiting for something inevitable and had just watched it arrive. "You're Grace Hartley's granddaughter," he said. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Emma Kate, and you're Henry Morrison." His eyes widened slightly. "How'd you know my name?" "Grace's journal. You helped her cover up Tom's death. You lied to the sheriff about what really happened." I watched his face as I said it, saw the color drain from his already pale complexion. "You've been carrying that lie for 50 years. Henry Morrison closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I did, and I'd do it again." The door to the back room opened and Sarah appeared, coffee pot in hand. She saw me, saw her husband's expression, and understood immediately what was happening. "Henry," she said gently, "maybe you two should talk in private." We went to their house, a small ranch-style place 2 blocks from the store. Sarah made more coffee that neither of us drank and then excused herself, saying she had errands to run, but we all knew she was just giving us space. Some conversations need to happen without witnesses. Henry sat across from me at his kitchen table, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked, marking time that felt both infinite and insufficient. "I loved Tom Hartley like a brother," Henry finally said. "We grew up together, went to school together. When he married Grace, I was his best man. When he bought that ranch, I helped him fix the fence and mend the barn and dig the well. He was family to me. And then he killed a child while drunk," I said. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't find a gentler way to state the truth. "Yes." Henry didn't flinch from it. "May 12, 1974, I got a call from Tom at 3 in the morning. He was hysterical, barely making sense. Said there'd been an accident, said I needed to come right away. So I did." He stared at his hands as he talked, and I realized he was seeing it all again, playing it back in his mind the way he probably had 10,000 times over the past 50 years. When I got there, Tom was sitting on the ground in front of the barn, covered in blood. Not his blood, Jamie's blood. The boy was lying there, and he was already gone. Nothing anyone could have done. Tom had backed the truck into him, pinned him against the barn wall, killed him instantly. The clinical details made it worse somehow, the specificity of tragedy. Tom kept saying it over and over. "I didn't see him, I was drunk, I didn't see him, he wanted to die right then." I had to take his rifle away from him because he was reaching for it, talking about how he deserved to die, how he needed to die. "So you called James Hartley," I said, remembering what Grace had written. "No, Tom did. Before I got there. Woke James up, told him to come to the ranch, told him there'd been an accident." Henry's voice cracked. "James arrived maybe 10 minutes after I did. He saw his boy lying there in the dirt, and he just collapsed. Fell to his knees and held Jamie and wept like I'd never seen a man weep." I tried to imagine it. A father holding his dead child, the kind of pain that rewrites your entire understanding of the world. "What happened next?" I asked. Tom kept apologizing, kept saying it was his fault. He'd been drinking. He should have been more careful. And James, God help me, James looked at him and said, "I forgive you." Henry shook his head. I couldn't believe it. His son was dead and he was offering forgiveness like it was bread. "But forgiveness came with conditions," I said, remembering Grace's journal entry. "James said Tom had to leave Stillwater. Said he couldn't see him every day, couldn't pass him on the street, couldn't be reminded constantly of what had happened. He said Tom needed to go somewhere far away and never come back. That was the price of forgiveness." And Tom refused. Not exactly refused, he just couldn't do it. Grace was 3 months pregnant. Tom wouldn't leave her. He kept saying he couldn't abandon his wife and unborn child, that he'd made enough mistakes for one lifetime. Henry's hands were shaking now. James left, took Jamie's body and left. And Tom just sat there in the barn. And I knew what he was going to do. You couldn't stop him? I tried. I stayed with him until dawn, talked to him, reasoned with him, begged him, but around 5 in the morning, I had to go home. I had to call the sheriff, had to start figuring out what we were going to say. I thought Tom would be okay for an hour. I was wrong. The silence stretched between us. Grace found him, Henry said. She woke up and he wasn't in bed. She went to the barn and there he was. He'd shot himself, left a note saying it was his choice, his fault, don't blame Grace. And that's when Grace decided to lie about how he died. She called me in a panic. The sheriff was on his way. She had maybe 20 minutes to decide what to tell him. I told her to tell the truth, but she said she couldn't. Said James's family had suffered enough. Said if the truth came out, everyone in town would know that James's son was killed by a drunk driver who then killed himself. The scandal would destroy both families. Henry stood and walked to the window, looking out at nothing in particular. So we agreed on a story. Tom died in a ranch accident, equipment malfunction. Tragic but not scandalous. The sheriff was my cousin. He was willing to file the report that way, no questions asked. James knew the truth. Grace knew the truth. I knew the truth. That was enough. Except it wasn't enough, I said, because the lie poisoned everything that came after. Yes, it did. He turned back to face me. Grace raised your mother, Kate, alone, never told her the truth about how Tom died or what he'd done. Told her he was a hero who died working the ranch. Kate grew up believing her father was a good man who died tragically young. Until she found out the truth, I said. She was 22 years old, 1997. She found Tom's journal while cleaning out the barn, read the whole thing, came to Grace demanding to know if it was true. Henry sat back down, suddenly looking every year of his 78. Grace told her everything, and Kate couldn't handle it, couldn't process that her entire childhood had been based on a lie. So she left, moved to Denver, said she needed time to think, needed distance from Stillwater and all the deception. Grace was heartbroken but understood. Thought Kate would come back eventually, and she did, but not the way Grace hoped. I thought about the timeline. Kate left in 1997. I was born in September 1998, which meant Kate got pregnant within months of leaving Stillwater. Kate came back pregnant, I said. Henry nodded. 8 months along, she showed up at Grace's ranch terrified, said she'd made a mistake, said she needed help. Grace was thrilled, thought maybe this baby would heal things between them, thought maybe Kate would stay, raise the child at the ranch, build a life in Stillwater. But James Hartley found out Kate knew the truth. Word travels in small towns. Someone saw Kate in Denver asking questions about her father's death. That someone mentioned it to someone else, and eventually it got back to James. He came to see Grace, demanded to know if Kate was stirring up the past. Henry's expression hardened with something that looked like anger. Grace tried to protect Kate, tried to say she'd handle it, but James was adamant. He said if Kate stayed in Stillwater, if she raised a child here, eventually that child would learn the truth. And when she did, it would open everything back up. The questions, the speculation, the scandal. He couldn't allow it. He threatened her, I said. He threatened all of you. Said he'd make sure everyone knew what Tom had done. Said he'd make sure Kate and her baby were ostracized. Said he'd use every bit of influence he had to make your lives miserable. Henry's jaw clenched. I heard about it after the fact. If I'd known what he was planning, I would have tried to stop him. But James Hartley doesn't announce his intentions. He just acts. And Grace chose to send Kate away rather than fight him. She chose to protect you. That's how she saw it. Kate could leave, start over somewhere else with a new name and a new life. You could grow up without the weight of the secret. Grace would stay in Stillwater, keep the peace, make sure the past stayed buried. Henry looked at me with eyes full of regret. She gave up her daughter and granddaughter to keep you both safe from a 50-year-old tragedy. The pieces were falling into place now, the full shape of the sacrifice Grace had made. She'd lost her husband to suicide, lost her daughter to exile, given up her granddaughter to protect us all from James Hartley's revenge. Where's Kate now? I asked. Henry hesitated. Sarah chose that moment to return, coming through the front door with grocery bags she clearly didn't need to buy right then. "Henry," she said quietly, "I think it's time Emma knew everything." I spent the next 2 hours learning things about my family that reshaped my entire understanding of the past 25 years. Sarah had been Grace's best friend for 40 years. The kind of friend who knew secrets that never made it into journals, who held confidences that died with their keeper. She told me about Grace's loneliness, how after Tom died, Grace never even considered dating again, how she poured all her love into raising Kate, into maintaining the ranch, into a garden that became her only real companion besides Sarah herself. "Your grandmother was the strongest woman I ever knew," Sarah said. We were sitting on her back porch now, Henry having excused himself to open the store. But she was also the saddest. She carried that secret like a stone around her neck. Never complained, never asked for sympathy, just bore it silently year after year. Did she ever regret lying about Tom's death? Every day. But she also believed it was the right choice. Protecting James's family, protecting her own daughter from the stigma. In her mind, the lie was an act of mercy for everyone involved. Except it destroyed her relationship with Kate. Sarah nodded slowly. When Kate found out, it broke something between them. Kate felt betrayed, said she'd spent her whole life believing her father was a hero when he was actually a drunk who killed a child. Grace tried to explain that Tom was both, that people contain multitudes, that one terrible mistake doesn't erase a lifetime of goodness. But Kate couldn't hear it. Not then. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage from somewhere distant. A dog barked. Normal sounds in a normal afternoon, except nothing about this felt normal. Kate left in February of '97, Sarah continued. Moved to Denver. Grace thought she'd be gone a few months, maybe a year. Time to process, to heal, to come back ready to rebuild their relationship. But then Kate met someone. "My father," I said. She never told Grace's name, just said she'd fallen in love with someone in Denver. Got pregnant quickly, came back to Stillwater in '98, 8 months along, scared and alone. The relationship had fallen apart, and Kate didn't know what to do. Grace must have been happy to have her back. Thrilled. She set up the nursery, bought baby clothes, read every book on grandparenting she could find. For 9 months after you were born, Grace had everything she'd lost. Her daughter, her granddaughter, a second chance at family. And then James found out Kate knew the truth. Sarah's expression darkened. "I was there the day he confronted them. Grace had invited me over to meet you. You were maybe 3 months old, beautiful baby, with Grace's eyes. Kate was in the kitchen making lunch. Grace was holding you in the rocking chair. And James Hartley showed up at the door." She paused, and I could see she was reliving it. He wasn't loud or violent. That's not his way. He was cold and precise. Said he'd heard Kate had been asking questions in Denver about her father's death. Said he couldn't allow her to stay in Stillwater if she was going to stir up the past. Kate tried to argue, said she just wanted to know the truth about her own father. James didn't care. He said if she stayed, if she raised you here, eventually you'd learn the secret too. And he wasn't going to spend the rest of his life waiting for the other shoe to drop. He gave her an ultimatum, I said. Leave Stillwater and never come back. Or he'd make sure everyone knew what Tom had done. He'd make sure Kate and you were treated as pariahs. He'd use his influence to make your lives unbearable. Sarah's voice shook with old anger. Grace begged him to reconsider. Said Kate had nowhere to go, no resources, a new baby. James didn't budge. He gave them 2 weeks to leave. And Grace decided to send me away instead. It was Kate's idea, actually. She said she couldn't raise you while constantly looking over her shoulder. Couldn't give you a stable life while living in fear. So she suggested giving you to Grace, and she'd leave alone. Start over somewhere else. Let Grace raise you at the ranch. But Grace didn't think that would work, I said, understanding now. Grace knew James would still see you as a threat. You'd grow up in Stillwater. You'd eventually ask questions about your mother, about your grandfather. The secret would never be safe. Sarah wiped her eyes. So Grace made the hardest choice of her life. She took you to Denver and placed you in foster care under false documents. Gave you a new last name, a new origin story. Made you invisible to anyone looking for Grace Hartley's granddaughter. And Kate went into hiding, changed her name. Grace helped her get set up in Oregon with money from selling off some ranch land. The deal was Kate would start completely over, never contact Grace, never try to find you. It was the only way to keep you truly safe from James's reach. The full magnitude of it settled over me like a weight. Three women, three generations, all sacrificing their relationships with each other to protect a secret that had already claimed three lives. Tom, Jamie, and in a way, Grace herself, who'd lived out her days alone on a ranch that should have been filled with family. "I have something for you," Sarah said. She went inside and came back carrying a shoebox. Old, corners worn soft, lid held on with a rubber band that had lost most of its elasticity. She handed it to me with the kind of care you give to something precious and fragile. "Grace left this with me before she died. Made me promise to give it to you if you ever came to Stillwater looking for answers." Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, all in the same handwriting, none of them ever sent. The first one was dated September 15th, 1999, my first birthday. "My darling Emma," it began, "you turned 1 year old today. You're in Denver at Riverside Home. I'm in Oregon under a new name. I think about you every second of every day. I imagine your first steps. I wonder if you smiled today, if someone held you, if you felt loved. I'm sorry I'm not there. I'm so sorry. Your mother, Catherine." The handwriting was shaky, like it had been written through tears. I opened another, this one from my 8th birthday. "Emma, you're 8 today. 3rd grade, I imagine. Do you like school? Do you have friends? I hope someone gave you a birthday cake. I hope you felt special. I wish I could tell you that I didn't leave because you weren't enough. You were everything. I left because staying would have hurt you worse. I see you in my dreams every night. You're always smiling. I hope real life is giving you reasons to smile too." There were 25 letters total, one for each birthday, a mother's annual accounting of all the moments she'd missed, all the milestones she'd watched pass from a distance, all the love she had no way to express except on paper that would never be delivered. The letter from my 16th birthday was longer than the others. 16. "You're becoming a woman and I've missed all of it. I've missed teaching you to drive, helping you through your first heartbreak, being there when you needed someone to tell you that you're beautiful and strong and capable of anything. I gave you up to protect you from a truth that would poison you. But maybe the poison was the absence instead. Maybe protecting you from one pain just created a different kind of pain, one that's carved into both of us. I don't know anymore. I don't know if I made the right choice. All I know is I love you and I miss you, and there's a hole in my life shaped exactly like you." The most recent letter was dated just last year, my 24th birthday. "Today you're the age I was when I gave you up. I wonder if you understand now what it feels like to make impossible choices. I wonder if you've forgiven me, or if you even know there's something to forgive. Grace is gone now. I'm alone with this secret, and the weight of it is crushing me. If you ever find these letters, know that I loved you. I love you. I will always love you. I just didn't know how to love you and protect you at the same time. I'm sorry for all the birthdays I missed, all the moments I wasn't there. You deserve better than the mother I was capable of being. I hope you're happy. I hope you're whole. I hope you're everything I dreamed you'd be." I sat on Sarah's porch holding 25 years of unsent letters and felt something crack open inside me. All those years of believing I was unwanted, believing I was the kind of child no one could love enough to keep. And here was proof that someone had been counting every birthday, recording every milestone, carrying the weight of my absence like a stone she couldn't put down. "She's still alive," I said. It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "Living in Astoria, Oregon. Goes by Rebecca Sullivan now. Works as an art teacher at an elementary school. Never married, never had other children. I think the guilt of leaving you consumed her." Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "Grace made me promise not to tell you where Kate was unless you asked. So I'm asking now. Do you want to know how to find her?" I thought about all the years of wondering, all the nights I'd lain awake at Riverside imagining what my mother might be like, where she might be, whether she ever thought about me. And now I knew. She'd thought about me every single day, had written to me every single year, had carried me with her in absence the way other mothers carried their children in presence. "Yes," I said, "I want to find her." Sarah gave me a phone number written on a piece of paper that looked like it had been prepared and waiting. Just 10 digits that could connect me to the woman who'd given me life and then given me a way to save it. I drove back to the ranch in a daze. The afternoon sun was starting its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The landscape that had seemed so foreign yesterday was beginning to feel familiar. The curve of the road, the placement of fence posts, the way the wind moved through the grass like water. At the ranch, I sat in Grace's kitchen and stared at that phone number for an hour. My hand reached for my phone a dozen times. Each time I pulled back. What do you say to a mother you've never met? How do you start a conversation that should have begun 25 years ago? Finally, as the sun touched the top of the western peaks and the light turned from gold to pink, I dialed. The phone rang once, twice, three times. I was preparing to leave a message when a woman's voice answered. Hello? It was just one word, but I heard myself in it. The same slightly husky quality, the same careful enunciation. The voice of someone who'd learned to be cautious with words. Is this Catherine Sullivan? I asked. A pause, long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Who is this? She asked. Her voice had changed, guarded now, frightened. My name is Emma Kate Hartley. I took a breath. I think you were my mother. The sound that came through the phone was something between a gasp and a sob. Emma, is it really you? Oh God, is it really you? I'm in Stillwater, I said. I found Grace's ranch. I found the journals. I know everything. Does James know you're there? The fear in her voice was immediate and visceral. I've met him. I know about Jamie. I know about the cover-up. I know why you left. Emma, you need to leave. You are not safe there. James won't let the truth come out. He'll do whatever it takes to protect his family's reputation. I don't care about his reputation. I care about understanding what happened. I care about meeting my mother. She was crying now, full sobs that she wasn't trying to hide. I'm so sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I've wanted to call you every day for 25 years. Every birthday, every Christmas, every random Tuesday when I saw a girl your age and wondered if she looked like you, acted like you, was you. Sarah gave me your letters, I said. All 25 of them. You read them? Every word. Then you know I never stopped loving you. You know I didn't leave because I didn't want you. I know, I said and meant it. I need you to come here. I need to meet you in person. I need to understand all of this, not just the parts written in journals and letters. If I come to Stillwater, James will know. The moment I show up, he'll know we're together. Let him know, I said. I'm done hiding from the past. I'm done letting fear make decisions for my family. She was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her weighing options, calculating risks, trying to decide between 25 years of caution and the desperate hope of reunion. I'll come, she finally said. It'll take me about 18 hours to drive from Oregon. I'll leave in the morning and be there tomorrow night. Are you sure? I asked. Emma, I've been waiting 25 years to meet you. I've been living half a life, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the past to catch up with me. If it's going to catch up anyway, at least let me be with my daughter when it does. We talked for another 10 minutes. Small things. Her voice. My life at Riverside. The ranch. The weather. The kinds of things mothers and daughters might discuss if they'd had 25 years to build up to this conversation, instead of trying to compress it all into one phone call. When we finally hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of Grace's kitchen and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. I heated up soup from a can I'd bought at Morrison's and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the barn where my grandfather had died and the peaks beyond where the last light was fading. Tomorrow my mother would arrive. Tomorrow I would meet the woman who'd carried me, given birth to me, held me for 9 months, and then made the impossible choice to let me go. Tomorrow the past would finally stop being something I read about in journals and start being something I could touch and speak to and maybe eventually understand. I washed my bowl in the same sink where Grace had washed dishes for 30 years, dried it with a dish towel that had her initials embroidered in the corner, put it away in a cabinet that still smelled faintly of her presence. As I was getting ready for bed, I heard a sound outside, a vehicle coming up the gravel driveway. I looked out the window and saw headlights, then the dark shape of a truck pulling to a stop at the end of the drive. It just sat there, engine running, headlights pointed at the house. I watched it for 5 minutes. 10. It didn't move, didn't turn off, just sat there in the darkness, watching. Finally, the truck shifted into reverse and backed down the driveway, disappearing into the night the way it had come. But the message was clear. Someone knew I was here. Someone was watching. And tomorrow, when Kate arrived, whoever was in that truck would know we were together. The past I'd been excavating wasn't going to stay buried quietly. It was going to fight back. I locked all the doors and windows, something Grace's journal suggested she'd never had to do before. Then I lay in her bed in the room where she'd slept alone for 25 years and listened to the old house settle around me. Somewhere out there, James Hartley was probably sitting in his own house, drinking his own coffee, thinking about the woman who'd arrived to dig up the secret he'd spent 50 years keeping buried. Somewhere out there, my mother was packing a bag, preparing for a drive she'd probably imagined 1,000 times, but never thought she'd actually take. And somewhere in the darkness between those 2 points, the truth was waiting to reveal what happened when you tried to bury tragedy instead of facing it head on. I fell asleep eventually, Grace's journal on the nightstand beside me, the last entry bookmarked with my finger. "I've kept this promise for 25 years," she'd written in her final entry before she died. "Silence in exchange for safety, loneliness in exchange for peace. I don't know if it was worth the panya, but I made a choice and I lived with it. Now Emma will have to make her own choice. I pray she chooses better than I did." I woke in the early morning darkness to the sound of gravel crunching under tires. For a moment, I thought it was the black truck returning. Then I heard a car door open and close, footsteps on the porch, and a soft knock that sounded like someone who wasn't sure they had the right to be there. I looked at the clock, 4:30 in the morning. I went to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch, backlit by the dome light of a rental car, was a woman who looked like an older version of me. Same dark hair streaked with gray, same eyes, same uncertain posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime waiting for rejection. "I couldn't wait until tonight," she said. "I drove through. I hope that's okay. I hope this is okay. I hope I'm not." She trailed off and I saw that she was crying. "Hi, Mom," I said. And then we were both crying, and she was holding me, and I was holding her, and 25 years of absence tried to collapse into a single moment of presence that could never quite hold everything we needed it to. But it was a start. The truth was supposed to set me free. Instead, it trapped me between loyalty to the dead and justice for the living. And standing on my grandmother's porch at 4:30 in the morning, holding a mother I'd never known, I realized that freedom was far more complicated than I'd ever imagined. Kate and I stood there for a long time, neither of us willing to let go first. She smelled like lavender and coffee and something else I couldn't name, something that felt like recognition even though we'd never met. Her hands shook against my back, and I realized mine were shaking too. When we finally pulled apart, she kept her hands on my shoulders as if needing to confirm I was real. In the dim porch light, I could see the tracks of tears on her face, the lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of carrying weight she'd never been able to put down. "You look just like her," Kate said, her voice raw. "Just like Grace. Same eyes, same way of tilting your head when you're thinking." Sarah said I look like you. We all look like each other, 3 generations of Hartley women, all shaped by the same tragedy. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Can we go inside? I've imagined this house for 25 years, but I haven't actually been here since the day I left you." We went into the kitchen, and I made coffee while Kate walked through the room, touching things carefully as if they might dissolve under her fingers. I watched her from the doorway as she stood in the living room, looking at the photographs on the wall, the chronological record of her childhood, the sudden absence of images after she turned 17. "She never took them down," Kate said quietly. "I thought she'd erase me after what I did, after I left." "She kept everything," I said, "your school awards, your report cards, letters you wrote from summer camp when you were 12. She even kept the letters I wrote to Santa when I was little." Kate turned to look at me, and something in her expression crumbled. "She kept those? How did she even get those?" "I don't know, but she had them tied with a ribbon in her dresser drawer. Every year from the time I was 5 until I stopped believing." The coffee finished brewing, and we sat at the kitchen table where Grace had sat for 3 decades, where she'd marked my birthdays on calendars I never saw, where she'd written the journal entries that had brought me here. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with everything we didn't know how to say. Finally, Kate reached across the table and took my hand. "I need you to understand something," she said. "When I gave you up, it was the worst day of my life. Worse than finding out about Tom's accident. Worse than James threatening us. Worse than anything before or since. I held you for 9 months. I nursed you. I rocked you to sleep every night. And then I put you in Grace's arms and walked away, and it felt like cutting out my own heart. But you did it anyway, because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. Grace and I had discussed it for weeks. She wanted to keep you, raise you herself at the ranch. But we both knew James would never allow it. He'd made that clear. As long as you were in Stillwater, you were a threat to his peace. A reminder that his silence about Jamie's death was fragile. I thought about James Hartley, about the power Sarah had described him wielding in this town. What did he actually threaten you with? Kate's expression darkened. Everything. He said he'd tell everyone in town that my father killed his son while drunk. That Tom was a drunk and a child killer, and I was the daughter of a drunk and a child killer. He said he'd make sure no one would hire me, help me, or even speak to me, that I'd be a pariah, and so would you. But you were planning to leave anyway. You could have just gone to Oregon with me. I thought about it. But James said he had connections everywhere. Said he'd track me down, make sure everyone knew who I was and what my family had done. He said there was no town small enough to hide in, no city big enough to get lost in. Not if he was determined to find me. She pulled her hand back and wrapped it around her coffee cup, seeking warmth from something. Grace and I finally came up with the plan. She'd take you to Denver, place you in foster care under a false name. I'd change my name and disappear. We'd both give you up, but in doing so, we'd make you invisible to James. You wouldn't be Kate's daughter or Grace's granddaughter. You'd just be Emma, a foster kid with no history and no connection to Stillwater. And you both lived with that for 25 years. Grace did it better than I did. She stayed here, kept the secret, maintained the facade. I ran, changed my name to Rebecca Sullivan, moved to Astoria, got a job teaching art to elementary school kids. Built a whole new life that was really just an elaborate hiding place. The sun was starting to think about rising, turning the darkness outside from black to deep blue. I could see the outline of the mountains against the sky. Did you ever try to find me? I asked. Every day in my head, never in reality. Grace and I had an agreement, no contact, not with each other, not with you. It was the only way the plan worked. If James ever found out we were still connected, he'd know where to look for you. Kate's voice broke. Do you know what it's like to know your child is growing up 2 states away and not be able to even drive by the building where she lives? To have her birthday come every year and not be able to send a card or make a call? You wrote the letters. I wrote them and never sent them because sending them would have left a trail. But I needed to talk to you somehow, even if it was just words on paper that you'd never see. It was the only way I could be your mother from a distance. We talked through the dawn and into the early morning. Kate told me about her life in Astoria, teaching second graders, living alone in a small apartment overlooking the ocean, never dating seriously because how could she explain to someone that she had a daughter she'd abandoned? She told me about the therapy, the medication for depression, the years of barely functioning while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. I told her about Riverside, the rotating cast of foster families, the institutional birthdays, the learned skill of not getting too attached to anything or anyone. I told her about becoming a counselor, about staying at the home long past when I should have left, about being too afraid of the world to step into it. We're both hiding, Kate said when I finished. You stayed at Riverside, I stayed in Astoria, both of us afraid to actually live our lives. Grace stayed here, I added, alone on this ranch for 30 years. 3 generations of Hartley women, all imprisoned by the same secret. Kate looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. This has to stop. We can't let James Hartley's fear control us anymore. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet, but I drove 17 hours through the night to get here. I'm done hiding. I'm done living half a life. Whatever happens next, I want us to face it together. The words should have scared me, but instead they felt like permission. Permission to stop running, stop hiding, stop pretending the past didn't matter. We were here in the house where it all began, and maybe that meant we could finally end it. We spent the day together, and it felt like trying to compress 25 years into 24 hours. Kate helped me continue sorting through Grace's belongings. We found more photographs, more journals, more evidence of a life lived in quiet desperation. In the afternoon, Kate insisted on showing me the garden. It was overgrown now, weeds choking out whatever Grace had planted last. But you could still see the structure of it. Raised beds in neat rows, a trellis where tomatoes had climbed, stakes marking where different vegetables had grown. Mom had the most incredible garden, Kate said, kneeling to pull a weed. Every summer, she'd grow enough to feed half the town. She'd bring vegetables to Morrison's, to the church, to anyone who needed them. I think it was her way of staying connected to people while keeping them at a distance. Sarah said the garden was her therapy. It was. After Tom died, she threw herself into it. I remember being 4 or 5 years old, watching her work out here for hours. She'd come in covered in dirt, exhausted, and she'd finally be able to sleep. Kate pulled another weed. I used to help her when I was little, before I knew the truth, before everything got complicated. We worked in silence for a while, clearing weeds, trying to uncover what Grace had planted. There was something healing about it. Our hands in the same soil where Grace's hands had been, following the same patterns she'd established, connecting to her through the physical work she'd loved. That evening, we were making dinner when we heard a vehicle pull up outside. Through the window, I saw a sheriff's cruiser. My stomach dropped. "It's starting," Kate said quietly. The knock on the door was professional, official. I opened it to find a man in his late 50s, sheriff's uniform crisp despite the end of a long day. He had kind eyes but a tight jaw, the look of someone doing a job they didn't entirely agree with. "Evening," he said. "I'm looking for Kate Ross. I was told she might be here." Kate appeared behind me. "I'm Kate Ross, though I go by Sullivan now." The man's expression shifted, and I saw a recognition and something else. Conflict. "Kate, it's Michael. Michael Hartley." Kate went absolutely still. "Little Michael, Jamie's brother? Not so little anymore." He looked past us into the house as if checking for something. "Can I come in? This isn't an official visit." We let him in, though every instinct told me this was a mistake. Michael Hartley took off his hat and stood in the living room looking uncomfortable. "My father knows you're here," he said without preamble. "Both of you. Someone saw Kate arrive this morning and called him." "Let me guess," Kate said. "He sent you to tell us to leave." "Actually, he doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm on patrol." Michael looked at me directly. "You're Emma. I've heard about you. Grace talked about you sometimes to my mother, before my mother passed." "What do you want?" I asked. "To warn you. My father is planning something. I don't know what exactly, but I know him. He doesn't accept threats to his control. And you two being here together, that's a threat to 50 years of carefully maintained silence." "We haven't threatened anyone," Kate said. "Your existence is a threat. The fact that Emma found the journals, knows the truth, could potentially expose what happened. My father built his whole life on the foundation of that secret. His reputation, his children's reputations, his grandchildren's futures. He won't let it crumble." Michael moved to the window, looked out at the darkening landscape. "I need to tell you something I've never told anyone. I was there the day Jamie died. I was 8 years old playing in the barn loft. I saw everything." The room went absolutely silent. Kate sank into a chair. "You saw Tom hit him?" I asked. "I saw it all. Tom backing up the truck, Jamie running behind it, chasing a ball. Tom didn't see him. It happened so fast. One second Jamie was laughing, the next he was on the ground and Tom was screaming." Michael's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "I saw my father arrive, saw him hold Jamie, saw him forgive Tom, heard him tell Tom to leave town and never come back." "Did anyone know you were there?" Kate asked. "Not until years later. I climbed down from the loft and ran home before anyone could see me. Hid in my room. When they told me Jamie was dead, I pretended I didn't know how it happened." He turned back to face us. "I've carried that for 40+ years. The weight of watching my brother die and never being able to talk about it." "Why are you telling us now?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know the full truth. And because I'm tired. Tired of protecting a lie. Tired of watching my father control everyone out of fear. Jamie deserves better than to be a secret. He was a real person, a real boy, and he died. That should be acknowledged, not buried." Michael moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. My father is meeting with his lawyer tomorrow, and he's been making calls to people in Denver. I think he's trying to find leverage against you both. Be careful. He plays to win." After Michael left, Kate and I sat in the gathering darkness, neither of us bothering to turn on lights. "It's getting worse," Kate said. "I should leave. If I go, maybe James will back off." "If you leave, he wins again, just like he won 25 years ago. But if I stay, he'll come after both of us." I thought about that, about James Hartley with his power and his fear and his determination to keep the past buried. About 3 generations of women who'd sacrificed their relationships to appease that fear. about a secret that had claimed 3 lives and poisoned countless more. Let him come, I said. The next morning brought a visitor I wasn't expecting. A woman about Kate's age, expensively dressed in a way that spoke of careful maintenance rather than natural wealth. She pulled up in a new Lexus and walked to the door with the posture of someone used to being welcomed. Kate saw her through the window and gasped, "That's Rebecca Hartley, James's daughter." I opened the door before Rebecca could knock. Up close, I could see she had kind eyes that didn't quite match the tension in her jaw. "Emma," she said, "I'm Rebecca Hartley Cross. We need to talk." She looked past me and saw Kate. Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or memory. "Kate, it's been a long time." 25 years, Kate said coldly. "Can I come in?" "Please, I'm not here as my father's daughter. I'm here as someone who knows what it's like to carry family secrets that don't belong to you." We let her in, though Kate remained standing, arms crossed, defensive. Rebecca settled into the same chair Grace must have sat in for 3 decades and looked around the room with obvious nostalgia. "I used to visit Grace sometimes," she said, "before she died. My father didn't know. I'd come over for coffee, help her with projects around the ranch. She never talked about you, Kate, but I knew she was thinking about you. I could see it in how she'd look at old photographs when she thought I wasn't watching." "Why are you here?" I asked. "My father is trying to steal your ranch. He filed a lien claiming Grace owed his father money that was never repaid. It's fabricated, but he has lawyers and judges who owe him favors. He's planning to force a sale unless you sign over the property to him directly." "He can't do that," Kate said. "He can try, and in Stillwater, what James Hartley tries to do, he usually accomplishes." Rebecca looked at me. "I'm ashamed of him, but I need you to understand something about who he is and why he's doing this." "He wants to protect his reputation," I said. "It's more than that. My father changed the day Jamie died. The man he was before, that man died with his son. What's left is someone who spent 50 years trying to prevent anyone else from feeling the pain he felt." Rebecca's voice softened. "I was 3 years old when Jamie died. I don't remember him well, but I remember the grief that never left our house. My mother cried every day for years. My father never cried at all, just got harder and colder and more controlling." She pulled out a photograph from her purse and handed it to me. It showed a young boy, maybe 5 or 6, gap-toothed and grinning at the camera. "That's Jamie, the only picture I have of him. My father destroyed all the others after he died, said it was too painful to see them, but I kept this one hidden." Rebecca's eyes were wet. "He was my big brother. I barely remember him, but I've spent my whole life living in his shadow. Every choice my father made, every rule he enforced, every person he controlled, it was all in service of protecting Jamie's memory. Or protecting himself from having to grieve properly," Kate said. "Maybe both." Rebecca put the photo away. "I came here to ask you something. To beg you, actually. Leave Stillwater. Let this die with Grace and Tom. Don't make my father relive losing his son. Don't make him face what he's spent 50 years running from." "What about what we've lost?" I asked. "Kate lost her mother. I lost both of them. We lost 25 years we could have spent together, all because your father threatened us." "I know, and it's not fair. None of this is fair, but exposing it won't make it fair. It'll just create more pain." Rebecca stood to leave. "My father forgave Tom genuinely. That wasn't a performance. He loved Tom like a brother. But forgiveness didn't erase the pain. It didn't bring Jamie back. And when Kate threatened to expose what happened, it wasn't about reputation for him. It was about having to relive the worst day of his life in public." "He threatened an innocent baby," Kate said. "He threatened Emma." "I know. And I'm not defending that. I'm just asking you to understand that there's no villain here. Just broken people who made terrible choices, trying to survive unbearable pain." After Rebecca left, Kate and I sat in silence for a long time. The moral weight of what we were facing pressed down like a physical thing. We could expose the truth, destroy James Hartley's carefully constructed peace, and maybe get justice for the years of suffering our family had endured. Or we could walk away, let the secret die with Grace's generation, and preserve whatever fragile stability the Hartley family had managed to build. "I need to show you something," I said finally. I brought out Grace's final letter, the one I'd found in the photo album, the one where she'd confessed her own guilt about Tom's drinking. Kate read it slowly, tears streaming down her face. "She blamed herself," Kate whispered. "All those years she blamed herself for Tom's death." Everyone in this story blames themselves. Tom, Grace, you, James, even Michael for not speaking up about what he saw. It's like the tragedy created this web of guilt that trapped everyone who touched it. Kate folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me. I need to go somewhere. Will you come with me? We drove to the Stillwater Cemetery on the edge of town. It was small, maybe 100 graves, most of them dating back to the town's founding. Kate led me to a corner plot marked by a simple headstone. James Hartley Jr., 1968 to 1974. Beloved son and brother, gone too soon. Fresh flowers sat in the holder at the base, roses that couldn't have been there more than a few days. Your father brings them every week, a voice said behind us. We turned to find James Hartley standing 20 feet away. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with white hair and a face carved by 7 decades of Wyoming weather and private grief. He looked at us without surprise, as if he'd known we'd come here eventually. I've been bringing flowers to my son's grave for 50 years, he said, walking closer. Every Sunday, rain, snow, heat, I've never missed a week. He knelt by the headstone and adjusted the flowers, touching the stone with a gentleness that didn't match the hard man Rebecca and Michael had described. You're Emma, he said without looking at me. You look like Grace and like Kate, 3 generations of Hartley women, all shaped by what happened here. He finally stood and turned to face us. I know why you're here. I know you've read the journals. I know you know everything. Then you know you've stolen 50 years from my family, Kate said. And you stole my son. Not you personally, but your father did. Tom Hartley killed my boy, and I forgave him, and that forgiveness has cost me everything. James's voice was steady, but his eyes were devastated. Do you want to know what it's like to forgive someone for killing your child? It's like swallowing poison every day and pretending it's medicine. You threatened my daughter, Kate said. I protected my family, just like Grace protected hers by lying to the sheriff. Just like you protected Emma by giving her up. We all made choices to shield the people we loved from unbearable truth. He looked at me directly. I'm sorry you grew up without a family. That was never what I wanted. But I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life watching Grace raise you, seeing Tom's granddaughter every day, being reminded that my son was dead and his killer's line continued. So you made us disappear, I said. I made you safe. If you'd stayed in Stillwater, the truth would have come out eventually. You'd have learned that your grandfather killed a child while drunk, that your grandmother lied to police, that your entire family was built on lies and tragedy. Is that really the childhood you wish you'd had? The question hung in the air. I didn't have an answer. I'm meeting with my children tomorrow morning, James said, all 3 of them. I'm going to tell them the full truth about what happened, about the accident, the suicide, the cover-up, about why I forced Kate to leave, about all of it. He paused. I'd like you both to be there. You deserve to hear their reactions. You deserve to face the people your family's actions affected. Our family's actions? Kate said, anger flaring. Tom made a mistake, a terrible, tragic mistake, but you're the one who's weaponized it for 50 years. And Grace is the one who lied to protect him. We're all complicit, Kate. Every single one of us chose silence over truth. Now it's time to break that silence. Together. He started to walk away, then stopped. 8 a.m. tomorrow, my ranch, all of us. We settle this, one way or another. We watched him place one more flower on Jamie's grave before walking to his truck and driving away. Kate and I stood there for a long time, looking at the headstone of a 6-year-old boy who'd been dead for 50 years but still controlled the living. He's right, I said finally. Everyone's guilty. Everyone's innocent. There's no clean answer here. So what do we do? I thought about Grace's final letter, about her hope that I'd choose better than she had, about 3 generations of women who'd sacrificed connection for safety and found that safety without connection was just another kind of death. We go to the meeting, I said. We tell the truth, and then we let the chips fall where they will. That night, Kate stayed in Grace's bed, and I slept in my mother's childhood room. Before we went to our separate spaces, we sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one over the mountains. I'm scared, Kate said, of tomorrow, of what comes after. Me too. But I'm also grateful. For the first time in 25 years, I'm with my daughter. Whatever happens tomorrow, I have that. I reached over and took her hand. We have each other now. That's what Grace wanted. That's what all of this was for. The stars multiplied above us, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere in town, James Hartley was preparing to face his children with the truth he'd hidden for 50 years. Somewhere, Rebecca and Michael and Daniel were about to learn that their entire understanding of their family was built on lies. And somewhere in the darkness between then and now, the truth was gathering itself, preparing to break free after half a century of captivity. Tomorrow we would face it. Tonight we sat together on Grace's porch, mother and daughter finally united, and let the weight of what was coming settle over us like stars. Whatever happened next, we would face it together. That's what family did. Even family that had been broken and scattered and forced apart by tragedy and fear. We would face it together and maybe, just maybe, find a way to forgiveness that didn't require anyone to disappear. Sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, it's between two rights that can't both be chosen. And as Kate and I drove to James Hartley's ranch that morning, I realized we were heading toward a moment where every choice would hurt someone. The Hartley Ranch was everything Grace's place wasn't. Where hers was small and weathered and honest about its struggles, his was sprawling and maintained and spoke of resources carefully deployed over decades. 800 acres of prime grazing land, a main house that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about Western living, outbuildings that were actually maintained instead of slowly surrendering to gravity and time. We pulled up at 7:55. Two other vehicles were already there, a newer pickup that probably belonged to Michael, and a minivan that must have been Rebecca's. Kate's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. She hadn't said more than 3 words the entire drive. "We can still leave," I said. "We can get back in this car and drive away and let the past stay buried." "Could we, though? Really?" She looked at me with eyes that held 25 years of running. "I've been leaving my whole life, Emma. Leaving Stillwater, leaving you, leaving any chance at happiness, because I was too scared to face what happened. I'm done leaving." We got out of the car. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the smell of hay and cattle and the particular scent of a ranch that's been worked for generations. In the distance, the peaks stood solid and unchanging, the same ones that had watched Tom Hartley die and Grace Hartley suffer, and all of us scatter like leaves in wind. James opened the door before we could knock. He looked older than he had at the cemetery, as if the weight of what he was about to do had aged him overnight. "Thank you for coming," he said. Simple words, but they carried the gravity of everything unspoken. "Everyone's in the dining room." We followed him through a house that was beautiful in that careful way that speaks of someone maintaining appearances. Professional photographs on the walls, furniture that matched, everything in its place. The opposite of Grace's house where life had been lived messily and honestly. The dining room held a table large enough to seat 12. 5 people were already there. Rebecca, who I recognized from yesterday. Michael in civilian clothes, looking uncomfortable. A younger man I assumed was Daniel. And 2 other people I didn't know. A woman in her 70s with kind eyes, and a man about the same age with pastor collar. "This is my youngest son, Daniel," James said, gesturing to the man in his early 40s. "And this is Pastor Michael Cross and his wife, Janet. They've been with our family through everything, and I asked them to be here today." The name registered, and I looked at Kate. Her face had gone pale. Pastor Cross stood. "Kate, it's been a long time." 26 years, Kate said quietly. James gestured for everyone to sit. Kate and I took seats at one end of the table, the Hartley siblings and their guests at the other, James at the head like a patriarch about to deliver judgment. Except today, he was the one on trial. "I've asked you all here because it's time," James began. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he placed them on the table. "For 50 years, I've kept a secret. For 50 years, I've asked others to keep it too. And that silence has poisoned 3 generations of 2 families. It ends today." Rebecca reached over and took her father's hand. Michael sat rigid, knowing what was coming. Daniel looked confused. "On May 12, 1974, my son Jamie was killed in an accident on the Hartley Ranch." James's voice cracked slightly on Jamie's name. He was 6 years old, playing behind a barn while Tom Hartley, his uncle, was backing up a truck. Tom was drunk. He didn't see Jamie. The truck pinned him against the barn wall and killed him instantly. Janet Cross made a small sound. Daniel's mouth opened in shock. "Dad," Daniel said, "you told us Jamie died in a fall, that he climbed on equipment and fell." "I lied. We all lied. Tom, Grace, Henry Morrison, the sheriff. We covered it up because we thought it would protect everyone. James looked at his children. I forgave Tom immediately. It was an accident. He was my brother-in-law, my friend. I knew he was suffering, but I also knew I couldn't see him every day. Couldn't pass him on the street, share meals with him, pretend everything was fine. So I told him he had to leave Stillwater forever. That was the condition of my forgiveness. And he killed himself rather than leave, Michael said quietly. Everyone turned to look at Michael. You knew? Rebecca asked. I was there in the barn loft. I saw everything. Michael's voice was flat, emotionless in the way voices get when they're holding back decades of feeling. I saw Tom hit Jamie, saw Dad arrive and hold him, heard everything that was said. I was 8 years old and I climbed down from that loft and ran home and hid, and I've never told anyone until a few days ago. Rebecca started crying. Daniel sat in stunned silence. Pastor Cross had his arm around his wife, both of them looking stricken. Why didn't you tell us? Rebecca asked her father. Why did you let us grow up thinking Jamie died accidentally? Because I was ashamed. Ashamed that my son died because his uncle was drunk. Ashamed that I'd forgiven the man who killed him. Ashamed that I'd covered it up instead of demanding justice. James's composure was cracking. And because I was afraid that if the truth came out, you'd all be marked by it. The children of the man whose son was killed by a drunk driver who got away with it. So you let Grace Hartley lie to the sheriff, Daniel said, his voice hard. You let her perjure herself to protect you. To protect all of us. Grace made that choice. I didn't force her. She wanted to protect Tom's memory, protect the daughter she was pregnant with. We both wanted the same thing, for the tragedy to stay private. Until it couldn't stay private anymore, Kate said. All eyes turned to her. When I was 22, I found Tom's journal. Read about what he'd done, how he died. I confronted Grace and she told me everything. I was devastated. My entire childhood had been built on lies. My father wasn't a hero who died tragically. He was a drunk who killed a child and then took the coward's way out. Kate's voice was shaking, but she kept going. I left Stillwater, went to Denver, tried to build a new life away from all the deception, and then I got pregnant with Emma. I came back here thinking maybe I could start over. Raise my daughter with Grace's help, build something honest. And I destroyed that possibility, James said. You threatened us. You said if I stayed, if I raised Emma here, you'd make sure everyone knew what Tom had done. You'd make sure we were ostracized and punished for sins we didn't commit. I was trying to protect my family, James said, by destroying mine. Kate's voice rose. Emma grew up in foster care. I've lived in exile for 25 years. Grace died alone after giving up her granddaughter. All because you couldn't handle the possibility that people might find out your son was killed accidentally. It wasn't just about people finding out, Rebecca said quietly. Everyone turned to her. Dad, I need to say something I've never said. James looked at his daughter with something like fear. I resent Jamie sometimes. Is that awful? Rebecca's voice broke. He died when I was 3, and he's been the most important person in this family my whole life. Every decision, every choice, every silence. It's all been about protecting Jamie's memory. But what about us? What about the living? Don't we matter? Of course you matter, James said, but his voice was weak. Then why have we spent 50 years preserving a lie? Jamie died. It was tragic and terrible and unfair. But he's gone, Dad. He's been gone for 50 years. We're still here. When do we get to matter more than a ghost? The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at nothing. Michael stared at his hands. Pastor Cross seemed to be praying. I have something to confess too, Michael said, about what I saw that day. Tom wasn't the only one responsible for Jamie's death. He looked directly at his father. You and Tom had been fighting for weeks before it happened. About money, about the ranch, about Grace being pregnant. I heard you arguing the night before. You told Tom he was weak, that he was failing, that he'd never amount to anything. Tom went out to the barn and I heard bottles clinking, heard him crying. You broke him, Dad, and the next morning, broken and drunk, he killed Jamie. James's face went white. I never meant for anything like that to happen. I know you didn't mean for Jamie to die, but you contributed to the conditions that led to it. We all did. The whole family was in crisis and nobody was helping Tom. We were all too busy with our own problems. That's not fair, Michael, Rebecca said. We were children. I'm not blaming us. I'm saying there's enough blame to go around. Tom, Dad, the circumstances, bad luck, God's will or absence of it. Jamie died because of 1,000 small failures that converged in one terrible moment. Not because of one villain we can hate. Daniel finally spoke. I need to ask you something, Dad, and I need you to be honest. James nodded. If it had been me instead of Jamie, if I'd been the one playing behind that truck, would you have forgiven Tom so easily? The question hung in the air like poison. James opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know, he finally said. Maybe not. Jamie was special to me. My firstborn, my best boy. Your favorite, Daniel finished. That's what I've always suspected. That's why this whole thing has never made sense. You forgave Tom because you loved him almost as much as you loved Jamie. But the rest of us? We're just the children who survived. Daniel, that's not true, James said, but there was no conviction in it. The conversation was spiraling. Decades of unspoken resentment pouring out like water from a broken dam. I watched these people, this family that had been held together by silence, finally fracturing under the weight of truth. And then Kate stood. I need to tell you all something, she said, about Emma. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. When I got pregnant with Emma in Denver, I was in a relationship with a man I loved. We were planning to get married, and then I found out he was from Stillwater. Found out he knew about the Hartley family, knew about the tragedy. When I told him I was pregnant, he panicked. His family pressured him to leave me, said I was trouble, said I'd ruin his life. Kate looked directly at Pastor Cross. Your brother David is Emma's father. We dated briefly. When I got pregnant and told him about Tom and Jamie, he went to your father for advice, and your father told him to stay away from me. Pastor Cross went absolutely still. Janet put her hand over her mouth. David, Pastor Cross said, my brother David is your father? He was looking at me now, and I saw the recognition dawn. The same eyes, the same way of tilting his head. He never told you, Kate said. He married someone else within a year, had 3 kids, built a life pretending I didn't exist, pretending Emma didn't exist. Kate, I didn't know, Pastor Cross said. If I'd known, I would have talked to him, made him do the right thing. Would you have, or would you have protected your family's reputation the same way James protected his? The words landed like blows. Pastor Cross looked like he'd been struck. This is what secrets do, Kate continued. They don't just hide one truth. They metastasize, they spread. Jamie's death became Tom's suicide, which became Grace's lie, which became my exile, which became Emma's abandonment, which became David's betrayal. One tragedy 50 years ago, and we're all still bleeding from it. I found my voice. I don't want to hear any more about who's to blame. I've spent the last 3 days learning about all the ways everyone failed everyone else. Tom failed Jamie. James failed Tom, and Grace, and Kate and me. Grace failed Kate and me. Kate failed me. Henry Morrison failed everyone. It's an endless chain of failure and pain, and no one gets out clean. Everyone was looking at me now, but I've also learned something else. Every single person in this story was trying their best with impossible choices. Tom knew he had a problem with drinking, but didn't know how to stop. James forgave genuinely, but couldn't handle the daily reminder. Grace lied to protect people she loved. Kate left to keep me safe. You all made terrible choices, but you made them out of love or fear or desperation. Not malice, not evil, just human weakness under unbearable pressure. So what do you want from us? Daniel asked. I want to understand. I want to know why my grandmother gave me up, why my mother left me, why I grew up alone. And now I do understand. I don't like it. I'm angry about it, but I understand it. And then what? James asked. Do you want revenge? Do you want to expose all of this? Destroy what's left of our families? I thought about that, about going to the media, writing a tell-all, making sure everyone knew what James Hartley had done, what secrets Stillwater had kept. I could do that. The evidence was all there. I had the journals, the letters, the testimony of everyone in this room. And it would accomplish exactly nothing except more pain. I want you to drop the lien on my ranch, I said to James. I want you to let me live in Stillwater without harassment. I want you to acknowledge that Jamie existed, that he died, that it was a tragedy, without having to lie about how it happened. And in exchange, James asked, in exchange, I keep Grace's secret. I let Jamie rest in peace. I don't expose anything publicly. I looked around the table, but privately among all of us, we tell the truth. We honor Jamie properly. We acknowledge what happened, and we try to heal instead of just hiding. Rebecca started crying again, but this time it sounded like relief. "You'd do that?" James asked, "after everything I did to you and your mother?" "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Grace. She spent 50 years keeping this secret and it made her miserable. She gave up her daughter and granddaughter to protect people who didn't deserve protection. I won't honor that sacrifice by repeating her mistakes." I stood and walked to the window where Daniel was standing. Outside, cattle grazed peacefully. Life continued regardless of human drama. My grandmother spent her whole life choosing silence over connection. It protected people from scandal, but it poisoned her relationships. She died alone in a house that should have been filled with family. I turned back to face them. I'm choosing differently. I'm choosing to forgive what I can't change and to build something new from the broken pieces. Not because you deserve it, because I do, because Kate does, because we've all suffered enough. The room was silent for a long moment. Then James did something I didn't expect. He stood, walked around the table, and knelt in front of Kate and me. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was raw with 50 years of unshed tears. "I'm sorry for threatening you. I'm sorry for making you leave. I'm sorry Emma grew up without a family. I'm sorry for all of it." Kate looked down at this man who'd controlled her life for decades, who'd forced her into exile, who'd stolen 25 years of her daughter's childhood, and I saw her face soften. "I'm sorry too," she said. "I'm sorry Tom killed Jamie. I'm sorry Grace lied. I'm sorry for all the ways our family failed yours." "We failed each other," James said, "but maybe we can stop failing now." He stood and went to a briefcase by the door, pulled out papers, and brought them back to the table. "I had these drawn up last night. It's the deed to 40 acres of my ranch, the land that borders yours. It should have been Tom's when my father divided the property. Then it should have been Grace's. Now it's yours, Emma. No conditions, no strings, just an apology written in land." I stared at the papers. 40 acres of prime grazing land. Enough to make Grace's ranch viable again. To actually run cattle, to build something sustainable. "Why?" I asked. "Because you showed me something yesterday at the cemetery. Forgiveness is possible. Healing is possible. I spent 50 years holding on to my pain like it was the only thing I had left of Jamie. But you're right, all it did was poison everything else." Rebecca stood and came around the table, stood in front of Kate and me. "I'm sorry too, for my father's actions, for not speaking up sooner, for living my whole life in Jamie's shadow instead of trying to step into the light." She looked at me. "Your family, complicated, broken, messy family, but family nonetheless. I'd like to get to know you, if you're willing." Michael joined her. "I've carried the weight of what I saw for 46 years. Telling the truth, even just to this room, feels like putting down a stone I've been carrying since I was 8. Thank you for making that possible." Even Daniel came over, though he still looked shell-shocked. "I didn't know any of this until 20 minutes ago. I don't know how to process it, but I know I'm tired of family secrets and I'm tired of pretending we're perfect. Maybe honesty is the first step to actually being okay." Pastor Cross approached cautiously. "Emma, I need to find my brother. He needs to know about you. He needs to have the chance to be your father, if you're willing to let him." "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I said honestly. "That's fair. But when you are, if you are, I'll make sure he's there. It's the least I can do after my father's advice kept you apart." Kate and I drove back to Grace's ranch in silence. We were both processing everything that had happened, all the revelations and apologies and tentative steps toward healing. When we pulled up to the house, there was another car in the driveway. A man in his early 50s stood by the porch, pacing nervously. Kate gasped, "That's David." I looked at the man who was biologically my father. He had kind eyes and graying hair, and a posture that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else but here. We got out of the car. David stopped pacing. "Kate," he said, "Michael Cross called me. Told me everything. I drove straight here from Billings." "That was 5 hours ago," Kate said. "I know. I've been sitting here trying to figure out what to say." He looked at me. "You're Emma. You're my daughter." "Biologically," I said. "Yes, biologically. And I know that's not enough. I know I abandoned you and your mother. I know I chose my family's approval over doing the right thing. I know I'm 25 years too late." He took a step closer. "But I'm here now, and I need you to know that not a day has passed that I didn't think about you. Not a birthday, not a Christmas, not a random Tuesday. I told myself I was protecting you by staying away, but really I was protecting myself from having to face what I'd done." "Why are you here now?" I asked. Because Michael told me you were offering forgiveness to people who didn't deserve it. And I thought if you could forgive James Hartley for threatening you, maybe there was a chance you could hear my apology too. I haven't forgiven James, I said. I've just chosen not to let his actions define my future. There's a difference. Then let me work to earn forgiveness. Let me try to be the father I should have been from the start, even if it's just in small ways, even if it takes years. Kate spoke up. David, you have a wife, children, a whole life that doesn't include us. I know, and I've told them everything. My wife knows about you, about Emma. My kids know they have a half-sister. They were shocked, hurt, angry, but they also said I needed to make this right if there's any way to do it. I looked at this man who'd given me half my DNA and none of my childhood. I tried to feel anger, but all I felt was tired. Tired of being angry at people for being human. Tired of carrying resentment like a badge. Tired of letting the past poison any chance at a future. I'm not ready to call you Dad, I said. I'm not ready to meet your family or have some tearful reunion. But if you want to be in my life, you can start by being honest. No more secrets, no more running, just honest, complicated, messy relationship building. I can do that, David said. And you need to know that Kate is my mother, not biologically just, but actually. We're building something together and you don't get to disrupt that. I wouldn't dream of it. Kate and I looked at each other. An entire conversation happened in that glance. Permission asked and granted. Boundaries set, hope cautiously acknowledged. You can stay for coffee, Kate said to David, but then you need to go home to your family. We'll figure out what comes next slowly. Together. The three of us went into Grace's house, into the kitchen where 3 generations of women had sat and made impossible choices, where Grace had marked my birthdays alone, where Kate had written letters she never sent, where I'd learned the truth that had shaped my entire life. David sat at that table and we talked. Awkwardly at first, then more naturally. He told us about his life, his work as a lawyer, his children who were technically my half-siblings. Kate told him about her years in Oregon, the loneliness, the constant looking over her shoulder. I mostly listened, watched these 2 people who'd made me and then unmade themselves trying to protect me from a truth I'd eventually found anyway. When David finally left, promising to call in a few days, Kate and I sat on the porch as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. We did it, Kate said. We faced the truth and we survived it. Grace would be proud, I said. I think she would be angry we didn't do it sooner, that we wasted so much time hiding. Maybe, or maybe she'd understand that we all had to arrive at this moment in our own time. The sun touched the top of the distant peaks, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in town, James Hartley was probably sitting with his children, processing 50 years of secrets finally spoken aloud. Somewhere, David was driving home to tell his family about the daughter he'd just met. Somewhere, Henry and Sarah Morrison were probably relieved that the truth had finally emerged and no one had been destroyed by it. And here, on Grace's porch, Kate and I sat together. Mother and daughter, 2 women who'd been separated by fear and reunited by truth. 2 survivors of a tragedy that had claimed 3 lives and poisoned 2 families. What happens now? Kate asked. We rebuild. We take James's 40 acres and Grace's land, and we make something of it. We plant the garden again. We fix the barn. We run cattle. We build the life Grace always wanted, but could never have. You want to stay in Stillwater? I think I do. This is where I'm from, where my family is from. All the pain and tragedy and secrets, it's still home. Or it can be, if we make it that. Kate leaned her head on my shoulder. I've been running for 25 years. It'll be strange to stand still. We can learn together. The stars were beginning to appear, one by one in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched Tom Hartley drive a truck drunk. The same stars that had witnessed Grace's lonely vigil. The same stars that were watching us now, trying to forge something new from the broken pieces of the past. Tomorrow we would start the work of actually building a life together. Tomorrow there would be practical concerns and difficult conversations in the slow, painful work of becoming a family. But tonight we sat together in the gathering darkness and let ourselves believe that healing was possible. That forgiveness, even imperfect forgiveness, could create space for something better. That 3 generations of women had suffered enough, and maybe, just maybe, the cycle could be broken. Inside the house, Grace's Bible still sat on her nightstand. Her garden tools still hung in the barn. Her handwriting still marked the calendar on the wall. She was gone, but her legacy remained. Not the legacy of silence she'd intended, but a different legacy. The legacy of love so fierce it survived even the worst choices. The legacy of sacrifice so complete it transcended understanding. The legacy of hope that somewhere, somehow, the truth would emerge and healing would follow. Kate and I were that hope made flesh. Two people who had every right to hate each other, to hate James, to hate everyone who'd contributed to our suffering, but who chose instead to understand, to forgive what we could, to build what was possible, to honor Grace not by repeating her mistakes, but by learning from them. The mountains stood dark against the last light. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere a coyote called. All the sounds of a Wyoming night, eternal and indifferent to human drama. But we weren't indifferent. We were present. We were together, and that made all the difference. Finding my father should have been the happy ending. But real healing is messier, slower, and more beautiful than I ever imagined. And as I stood in Grace's kitchen 3 months after that family meeting, watching Kate teach me how to make biscuits from memory, I realized that happy endings aren't moments. They're choices you make every single day. The healing didn't happen overnight. There was no magical transformation where suddenly we were a functional family. Kate and I had good days where we laughed together and worked side by side, and we had hard days where old wounds opened up and we had to navigate around the pain like walking through a minefield. Some mornings I'd wake up angry that I'd lost 25 years with my mother, angry that I'd grown up in institutional care while she was alive and well in Oregon, angry that Grace had chosen silence over fighting for us. The anger would sit in my chest like a stone, and I'd have to work through it by myself because Kate had her own anger to process. She was angry at herself mostly, angry that she'd believed James Hartley's threats, angry that she'd run instead of fought, angry that fear had made her decisions for so long. Some days she'd apologize 3 or 4 times for things we'd already talked about, as if saying sorry enough times could erase 25 years of absence. But between the hard days were good ones. Days where we'd work in the garden together, our hands in the same soil Grace had tended for 30 years. Days where we'd sit on the porch in the evening and Kate would tell me stories about growing up on the ranch, about Grace before the loneliness set in, about Tom through the eyes of a daughter who'd never met him but had been shaped by his absence. We developed routines. Coffee together every morning at the kitchen table, working the land during the day, me learning from Kate, who was remembering from Grace. Dinner together most evenings, though sometimes Kate stayed in town at the small house she'd bought near Morrison's store. We were learning to be mother and daughter, but we were also learning to be two independent people who'd survived alone for so long that togetherness required conscious effort. David came to visit once a month. He'd drive up from Billings on a Saturday, spend the day with us, and drive back before dark. It was awkward at first. What do you talk about with a father you'd never met? How do you build a relationship with someone who shares your DNA but none of your history? But David was patient. He didn't push. He'd help with ranch work, fix things that needed fixing, tell stories about his life without expecting me to fill the gaps in mine. Slowly over months, we found our rhythm. He wasn't my dad in the way someone who'd raised me would be, but he was something, a presence, a connection, a man trying to make amends for a choice he couldn't undo. His other children, my half-siblings, took longer to come around. They were hurt and confused by the revelation that their father had a secret daughter. But eventually, the oldest one, a woman named Sarah, who was 2 years younger than me, reached out. We talked on the phone for 3 hours. She wanted to understand, wanted to know if I hated their family, wanted to find a way to reconcile the father she'd known with the man who'd abandoned a pregnant woman 25 years ago. I told her the truth, that I didn't hate anyone, that I was learning that people contain multitudes, that they can be good fathers and failed lovers at the same time. That complexity is the human condition, and judging isn't useful. Sarah came to visit in month 4, met Kate, saw the ranch, looked at me with my eyes reflected back in hers, evidence of shared biology even if we didn't share history. We didn't become instant sisters, but we became something. Two people connected by blood and circumstance, trying to figure out what that meant. The Hartley family became an unexpected source of support. Rebecca visited weekly, usually on Sunday afternoons. She'd bring pipo or cookies or some other offering, and we'd sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. She told me about Jamie in a way no one else had, not as a tragedy or a secret, but as a real boy who'd loved dinosaurs and hated broccoli and had a laugh that could light up a room. He was my big brother for 3 years, she'd said one Sunday. And then he was a ghost who haunted my family for 50. I'm trying to remember the boy instead of worshiping the ghost. Rebecca's daughter had a daughter, a 10-year-old named Emma. Rebecca had named her granddaughter after me, she said, because I'd given their family permission to be honest. Little Emma was curious and brave and reminded me of myself at that age, except she had a family who loved her openly instead of secretly. Michael stopped by occasionally in his sheriff's uniform, checking on us in that way that could have felt intrusive but somehow didn't. He was working through his own demons with a therapist in Billings, processing 46 years of carrying the weight of witnessing his brother's death. Some days he'd just sit on the porch and not talk, and Kate and I learned that was okay. That sitting with someone who understood pain was its own kind of healing. Even Daniel came around eventually. He was the most skeptical of the Hartley siblings, the one who'd been most shocked by the revelations. But he brought his wife and kids one Saturday, and we had a barbecue, and his children played in the same yard where Jamie had played 50 years ago. Life continuing, cycles breaking, new memories overlaying old tragedies. James Hartley remained complicated. He kept his word about the land, transferring the deed without conditions. He stopped the legal harassment, dropped the fabricated lien, but he didn't visit. I'd see him sometimes in town, at Morrison's store or at the diner, and he'd nod politely but keep his distance. Rebecca said he was struggling with what he'd done, with the weight of 50 years of choices he couldn't unmake. She said he wanted to apologize again, but didn't think he had the right, that he was dying slowly of shame and regret and the cancer that often comes when a body holds on to pain for too long. 6 months after our meeting, Rebecca called me on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was shaking. "Dad's in the hospital. It's his heart. The doctors say it's just a matter of time. He asked if you would come see him." Kate and I drove to the hospital together. James was in a private room, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily, monitoring a heart that had carried too much grief for too many years. He looked small in the hospital bed, diminished in a way that made me realize how much of his power had been performance. Rebecca and Michael were there. Daniel came in while we were sitting with James. The whole family gathered around this man who'd held them all hostage to his pain for half a century. James opened his eyes and saw me. Tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "You came," he said, his voice raspy from oxygen tubes. "Rebecca said you asked for me." "I'm dying, Emma. The doctors are too polite to say it, but I know, this is it." He paused, breathing labored. "I wanted to tell you something before I go." I waited. "You were right, and the meeting about choosing forgiveness over revenge, about building something new instead of preserving something dead." He looked at his children. "I spent 50 years protecting Jamie's memory at the expense of my living children. I can't get those years back. Can't undo the damage. But I can die knowing I finally told the truth." "Dad," Rebecca said, crying. "Hush, honey. Let me finish." He turned back to me. "Thank you for not destroying us. You had every right to, every reason to. But you chose mercy. That takes a strength I never had." "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I know. You did it for Grace, for Kate, for yourself. That's what makes it real." He closed his eyes, tired from the effort of speaking. "There's a box in my study at the ranch. Left it for you in my will. Pictures of Jamie, the real boy, not the ghost. I want you to have them. Want you to know who he was before all this, before the tragedy and the secrets." He died 3 days later. The funeral was well attended. James Hartley had been a powerful man in Stillwater for 7 decades. But the eulogy wasn't about power or prestige. Rebecca talked about her father's pain, his grief, his inability to move past losing Jamie. Michael talked about forgiveness, about how hard it is and how necessary. Daniel talked about choosing to remember his father's humanity instead of his failures. I didn't speak at the funeral, but I stood in the cemetery next to Kate, and we placed flowers on Jamie's grave alongside the ones for James. 2 Hartley boys, 16 and 171, both victims of the same tragedy in different ways. After the funeral, we went to James's ranch. The study was exactly as he'd left it. Neat, organized, everything in its place. The box was in the bottom drawer of his desk, wrapped in brown paper with my name on it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Jamie as a baby, Jamie as a toddler learning to walk, Jamie at 3, 4, 5, 6. Pictures of him laughing, playing, being a normal, happy child. On the back of each photo, James had written dates and captions. Jamie's first word, Jamie's first day of school, Jamie and his new puppy. There was also a letter written in James's handwriting, dated 1 week before he died. Emma, it began, these pictures are the only thing I have left of my son who lived. Everything else is just the shadow of grief. I'm giving them to you because you're the only person who's seen the full truth and still chosen kindness. Maybe you can remember Jamie as he was, not as the tragedy he became. Maybe in remembering him, you can help me finally let him rest. I'm sorry for what I did to you, to Kate, to Grace. I'm sorry it took dying for me to say it, James. Kate and I took the box home. We looked through every picture, read every caption. Jamie had been real, not a secret or a symbol or a reason for silence. Just a little boy who'd loved his family and died too young. That night, Kate helped me create a memorial. We took the best pictures of Jamie and had them framed, hung them in Grace's living room next to the pictures of Kate growing up and the pictures of me at Riverside that Sarah Morrison had somehow collected over the years. 3 generations of Hartley family, all visible, all acknowledged. No more secrets hiding in dresser drawers or attics. The work of restoring Grace's ranch became our therapy. Kate and I, along with help from Henry Morrison and occasional assistance from the Hartley siblings, spent the rest of that year bringing the place back to life. We fixed the sagging porch, repainted the house, repaired the barn roof, cleared the overgrown pastures, and brought in cattle using money from selling some of Grace's untouched savings that had been sitting in an account for decades. But the most important restoration was the garden. Grace's garden had been her sanctuary, and we wanted to honor that. Kate remembered the layout from her childhood. Tomatoes here, squash there, herbs along the fence line, sunflowers at the back to attract birds. We worked that soil for weeks, removing weeds, amending the earth, preparing it for new life. When it came time to plant, we did it together. Our hands in the dirt where Grace's hands had been, following patterns she'd established, connecting to her through the physical work she'd loved. The garden responded, seeds sprouted, plants grew. By midsummer, we had tomatoes ripening on the vine, squash spreading across their beds, herbs fragrant in the morning sun. Kate would stand in the middle of it sometimes, just looking around with tears in her eyes. Mom would have loved this, she'd say. She does love it, I'd respond, wherever she is. We started a tradition. Every Sunday, we'd harvest from the garden and take vegetables to Morrison's store. Henry would distribute them to anyone who needed them, the same way Grace had done for 30 years. It was our way of continuing her legacy, of being part of the community instead of hiding from it. Stillwater slowly accepted us. At first, there were whispers. Everyone knew something had happened between the Hartley family and Kate, between James and Grace. But they didn't know details. And after James died, the speculation mostly died with him. We became just Kate and Emma, the women running the old Hartley ranch. The women who made the best biscuits at the church potluck. The women who always had vegetables to share. The women who'd somehow brought the Hartley siblings back together after years of distance. One afternoon in late summer, I was in the barn working on a project when Kate called me to the house. I found her in what had been my childhood room, the nursery Grace had prepared. She was holding something wrapped in a cloth. I found this in the back of the closet, she said, behind some boxes Grace had stored. She unwrapped it to reveal a partially finished wooden cradle. Beautiful craftsmanship, carved by hand with intricate details. Horses running along the side rails. Mountains carved into the headboard. The wood was aged but solid. Tom made this, Kate said, running her fingers over the carvings. For me, he died before he could finish it. I looked closer and saw initials carved near the bottom. TH for K.H. Tom Hartley for Catherine Hartley. He was working on it the week he died, Kate said. Mom must have kept it all these years but couldn't bear to look at it. We took the cradle to town, found a woodworker who specialized in restoration, explained what we wanted. 3 weeks later, we picked it up, fully restored. The original carvings preserved, the wood refinished, the structure sound. But we'd asked the woodworker to add something. New initials next to the old ones. K.H. for E.H. Catherine Hartley for Emma Hartley. We placed the cradle in the living room, not as something to use, but as a memorial. Tom's love for his daughter, unfinished by his death, completed by that daughter 50 years later. Another cycle closed, another wound healed. As fall approached and the garden began its natural decline, Kate and I harvested the last of the vegetables and spent an evening canning them the way Grace had taught Kate decades ago. We worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when people have moved past the need to fill every moment with words. "I'm thinking about staying," Kate said suddenly. I looked at her. "I thought you were staying. You bought a house here." "I mean permanently. Giving up the house in Oregon, selling it, making Stillwater my home again." She paused in her work, looking at me. "If that's okay with you, I don't want to crowd you. I know you need space sometimes." "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like you to stay. It won't be perfect. We'll still have hard days. I'll still mess up being your mom sometimes. You'll still get angry at me for the past. I know, but we'll figure it out together." She smiled. It was the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and stays there. The kind that speaks of hope instead of regret. "Grace would be happy we're together," Kate said. "I think she'd be angry it took us so long to get here." "Maybe, but she'd also understand. She spent her whole life making impossible choices. She'd understand that we all had to arrive at this moment in our own time." Winter came to Wyoming the way it always does, suddenly and completely. The distant peaks disappeared behind walls of white. The ranch road became impassable for days at a time. Kate and I learned to plan ahead, stock up on supplies, settle in for the long siege of cold. Those winter months gave us time we hadn't had before. Time to talk without the distraction of work. Time to process everything that had happened. Time to build the foundation of a relationship that could withstand the inevitable storms. David visited for Christmas, brought his wife and children. It was awkward and wonderful and strange all at once. We sat around Grace's kitchen table, too many people for the small space, and shared a meal. My half-siblings asked questions about Grace, about the ranch, about what my life had been like. I asked about their childhood, their father, their world. We weren't a blended family. We were too fractured for that. But we were something, connected by blood and circumstance, and the shared recognition that families aren't just about biology. They're about showing up. They're about trying. They're about choosing each other even when it's hard. Rebecca came for Christmas too, bringing her daughter and granddaughter. Little Emma, 10 years old and full of questions about everything, decided I was the most interesting person she'd ever met. "You grew up in foster care?" she asked. "Was it scary?" "Sometimes," I told her honestly. "But I survived, and now I'm here. With your mom and your dad and all of us," she said. "You have a really big family now." "I do," I agreed. "It's complicated and messy and imperfect, but it's mine." "Will you teach me to drive the red truck?" she asked. "Grandma says it belonged to your grandfather." I looked at Kate, who nodded. "When you're older," I said, "but I can teach you about it now, about the man who drove it and what happened to him. The real story, not the pretty version." "I'd like that," little Emma said. After everyone left and it was just Kate and me again, we sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, looking at the stars. "We did it," Kate said. "We built a family out of broken pieces." Grace would say we're just continuing what she started. Maybe, but we did it differently. We did it with truth instead of secrets. That's got to count for something. Spring returned eventually. It always does. The snow melted, the roads cleared, the land remembered it was supposed to be green. Kate and I planted the garden again, this time with more confidence. We knew what we were doing now. We'd learned from our mistakes the previous year. On what would have been Grace's 75th birthday, we held a small ceremony at the ranch, invited everyone who'd been part of the story. Henry and Sarah Morrison, Rebecca, Michael, and Daniel Hartley with their families, David and his wife and children, Pastor Cross and his wife. We gathered in the garden Grace had loved. Kate spoke about her mother's strength, her loneliness, her sacrifice. Rebecca spoke about Grace's kindness, the quiet way she'd served the community. Henry confessed again about his role in the cover-up, how Grace had borne that burden with him for 50 years. And I spoke about the woman I'd never met but who'd shaped every day of my life, about her choice to give me up to keep me safe, about the letters she'd kept and the calendar she'd marked, and the love she'd carried in silence for 25 years. Grace's great tragedy was that she thought silence could protect the people she loved, I said. But silence just created more pain, more distance, more loneliness. So we're honoring her today by choosing differently, by speaking truth, by building connection, by being the family she always wanted but never got to have. We planted a tree in the garden, an apple tree that would grow and provide fruit for decades. A living memorial to a woman who'd given everything to protect her family and died alone because of it. As the months turned into a year and then into two, the rhythms of ranch life became natural. Kate and I were business partners as much as mother and daughter, running cattle, maintaining the property, building something sustainable. The 40 acres James had deeded to us made it possible to actually turn a profit, to imagine a future where the ranch could support us both. We hired help sometimes. Local kids who wanted summer work. Occasionally Michael would stop by and help with the heavy lifting, saying he needed the exercise and the excuse to avoid paperwork. Rebecca's granddaughter Emma became a regular visitor, spending weekends at the ranch, learning to ride horses and feed cattle and work the land the way her great-grandmother Grace had done. I taught her about Tom, about the accident, about the secrets that had poisoned two families, not to burden her with the past, but to make sure she understood that actions have consequences and that silence is never the answer. Why didn't they just tell the truth from the beginning? She asked one Saturday while we were mending a fence. Because they were scared, because they thought protecting people from pain was more important than being honest, because they didn't understand that lying creates a different kind of pain. What would you have done, she asked, if it was you and you'd been in the accident? I don't know, I said honestly. I hope I'd have been brave enough to face the consequences. But I understand why Tom wasn't. Guilt is a powerful thing. It can make you believe you don't deserve to live. That's sad, she said. It is, but it's also human. We're all capable of terrible mistakes. What matters is how we deal with them afterward. One afternoon in the third year, I was working in Tom's old workshop in the barn. I discovered a talent for woodworking, for taking rough pieces and shaping them into something beautiful. I was making a new rocking chair to replace the one in the nursery that had finally given up after decades of use. Kate came in and watched me work for a while. You have his hands, she said, Tom's hands, the same way of holding tools, the same patience with the wood. You think so? I know so. Mom used to talk about how he'd spend hours in this workshop, making things, fixing things. She said it was the only time he seemed truly at peace. I ran my hand over the chair I was building. I wish I'd known him, not just the parts in the journals, the whole person. Me too, but we can't change that. All we can do is honor what was good about him and learn from what wasn't. That's very wise. I've had a lot of therapy, Kate said with a smile. She sat on the workbench, watching me plane a piece of wood. I need to tell you something, she said after a while. I'm proud of you. I know I don't have the right to be proud since I didn't raise you, but I am. You took a tragedy that could have defined you and you transformed it into healing. That takes a kind of strength most people never find. I learned it from Grace, I said, and from you. 3 generations of women who kept going when giving up would have been easier. We're survivors, Kate said. We're more than that. We're healers. We're breaking cycles. We're building something new. On the 5-year anniversary of finding Grace's letter and coming to Stillwater, I stood in the garden early in the morning and thought about everything that had changed. The ranch was thriving. Kate and I had built a life together that was complicated and imperfect but real. The Hartley siblings had become family in the truest sense. Even David had found his place in my life, not as a traditional father, but as a presence, a connection, a man who'd made a terrible choice and spent 5 years making amends. Stillwater itself felt different, not because the town had changed, but because I had. It was home now, not just a place I lived, but a place I belonged. The whispers about the Hartley scandal had faded, replaced by newer scandals and concerns. Life continued. People moved on. But we remembered. Kate and I made sure of that. Every year on May 12th, the anniversary of Jamie's death and Tom's suicide, we placed flowers on both their graves. Honored the tragedy without letting it define us. Remembered the pain without being consumed by it. And every year on September 15th, my birthday, Kate and I would sit on the porch and she'd give me a letter. The continuation of the tradition she'd started 25 years ago. Letters she wrote to the daughter she'd given up. Except now she could hand them to me directly instead of keeping them locked away. This year's letter was different though. Open it later, she said, when you're alone. That evening, after Kate had gone home to her house in town, I sat at Grace's kitchen table and opened the envelope. My darling Emma, it began, 25 years ago today, I gave you up because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. For 25 years, I've lived with that decision. Some days I believed it was right, Most days I believed I'd made the worst mistake of my life. But now, 5 years after you came back to me, I know the truth. The mistake wasn't giving you up to protect you. The mistake was believing that protection required absence. The mistake was choosing fear over fighting for you. I can't change the past, can't give you back the childhood you deserved, can't undo the loneliness we both suffered, but I can give you the present and the future. I can show up every day. I can be the mother I should have been from the start. Thank you for giving me that chance. Thank you for choosing forgiveness when you had every right to choose anger. Thank you for building this life with me, even though I didn't earn the privilege. I love you. I've loved you every day since you were born, and I'll love you every day until I die. That's my promise, not silent love from a distance, but present, active, everyday love. Happy birthday, my darling girl. Your mother, Kate. I folded the letter carefully and added it to the box where I kept all her letters. 25 years of absence, 5 years of presence. A record of love that survived even the worst choices. The sun was setting. I walked out to the barn and climbed into the red Ford, the truck that had hidden Grace's journal and started this entire journey. I turned the key and listened to the engine turn over, strong and reliable despite its age. Some things endure, some things survive. I drove the truck out to the garden and parked it where Grace used to park it, right next to the tool shed. Tomorrow I'd teach Rebecca's granddaughter to drive it, pass on the skill the way it should have been passed to me, create a new tradition that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. As I walked back to the house, I saw a car coming up the driveway. Kate. She'd forgotten something or decided she didn't want to spend the night alone. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she could come back, that there was no more hiding, no more distance, no more choosing isolation over connection. I thought you went home, I said as she got out of the car. I did. Then I realized I didn't want to be home. I wanted to be here with you. She paused. Is that okay? More than okay. We went inside together, made tea, sat at the kitchen table where Grace had sat and Kate had sat, and now we sat together. 3 generations of Heartland women, connected across time by love and loss and the slow work of healing. Tell me a story about Grace, I said, one I haven't heard. Kate thought for a moment. When I was little, maybe 6 or 7, I asked her why she never dated, why she stayed alone. She said that she'd had her great love and losing him had used up all her capacity for romantic attachment, but that she still had plenty of love left for me. Do you think that was true? I think she believed it. I think she made it true by choosing it every day. She could have moved on, found someone else, built a different life, but she chose loyalty to Tom's memory and to raising me. That was her version of love. It's a lonely version. It was, but it was also fierce. She loved us with everything she had, even when it meant giving us up to keep us safe. Kate reached across the table and took my hand. I'm trying to love you differently, not from a distance, not in secret, but here, present, every day. You're doing it, I said. You're here. So are you. That's what matters. We sat there as the darkness gathered outside and the kitchen light made a small island of warmth in the night. Tomorrow there would be work to do. Cattle to feed, fences to mend, the endless tasks of keeping a ranch running. But tonight we just sat together, mother and daughter, 2 survivors of a tragedy that had tried to break us and failed. 5 years ago, I'd stood on the steps of Riverside Foster Home holding a cardboard box and a letter from a grandmother I'd never met. 5 years ago, I'd been alone in the world, untethered and uncertain. Now I had a mother, a father who was trying, half-siblings who were learning to be siblings, an extended family of Hartley cousins and Morrison friends, and an entire town that had accepted us. I had a ranch that was mine by inheritance and choice. I had work that mattered and land that needed me and a future that felt possible. Grace had left me more than a ranch and a red truck. She'd left me a legacy of fierce love and terrible choices and the knowledge that surviving isn't the same as living. She'd left me the opportunity to choose differently, to break the cycles, to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. And I'd taken that opportunity. Kate and I both had. We'd chosen truth over secrets, connection over isolation, healing over hiding. It wasn't perfect, it was messy and complicated and some days still hurt, but it was real. It was ours. It was family. Outside, the stars were appearing one by one over the Wyoming night. The same stars that had watched Tom Hartley die and Grace Hartley suffer and Kate Hartley run. The same stars that were watching us now, choosing to stay, choosing to heal, choosing to love despite everything that made it hard. I looked at my mother across the kitchen table, saw grace in her features, saw myself reflected back. 3 generations of Hartley women, all survivors, fighters, all carrying the weight of choices made and choices inherited. But we were here, together, and that made all the difference. The truth had set us free. Not the truth about what happened 50 years ago, but the truth about what we wanted now. Family, connection, home, the courage to stay when running would be easier, the strength to forgive when anger would be justified, the wisdom to know that healing isn't a destination, but a choice you make every single day. I squeezed Kate's hand. She squeezed back. "I'm glad you came back tonight," I said. "I'm glad you're here to come back to," she said. And in that simple exchange, in that kitchen where Grace had marked my birthdays alone, we created something she never had. Not perfect love, not uncomplicated family, but presence, connection. The revolutionary act of choosing each other every day, despite everything. That was our inheritance, not the ranch or the red truck or the garden, but the knowledge that family isn't just about who raises you or who shares your blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses you every day in 1,000 small ways that add up to a life. We'd built that life, Kate and I, from broken pieces and old tragedies and secrets that had poisoned 3 generations. We'd built something new, something honest, something worth keeping. And tomorrow we'd wake up and build it again. And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as we both lived. That was the promise Grace had wanted to make, but couldn't. The promise Kate had wanted to keep, but didn't know how. The promise I was making now, not to them, but to myself. To stay, to heal, to love openly instead of secretly. To build a family not on the foundation of silence, but on the harder, better ground of truth. The stars wheeled overhead. The wind moved through the grass. And in Grace's kitchen, in her house, on her land, 2 women sat together and chose each other. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.